What's up? What's up? What's up? It's Sunday Live. I'm here with my buddy Blues. What's happening, man?
And so it begins.
Yeah, Marshall aficionados, guitar players unite.
I know, right? Straight dorkery. I mean, it's just going to happen, you know.
Well,
But I gotta say, you're one of the only people I really go down that far with the rabbit hole with. I'm so, because you're like it's no joke. I think I have you in my phone as my gear guru. It's pretty crazy because there's really like whenever I have a question or anything, I just reach out to you. You've already kind of gone down that rabbit hole. I'm like, he can save me about 6 months worth of work. So,
oh man. Well, I gotta say, like, I mean, I've been following you for a long time, well before we knew one another, all the way back into the 80s. And I think we were talking pickups a little while ago, and I think I told you a story that I was like, dude, the craziest thing, I remember driving to buy your Trembucker Blue Saraceno signature Seymour Duncan and getting in a car wreck. In like 1988. Like, I remember I was so excited to get your pickup, and I was like on my way to the store, and somebody rear-ended it. It wasn't bad or anything like that.
It's funny. The Seymour Duncan, that's probably the longest standing endorsement I've had. I think I originally, because I came up via the Ibanez camp, and they were obviously very DiMarzio, and there was a guy over at DiMarzio, Steve Blucher, very nice guy, super talented. I actually had him come play pedal steel on my, I think, the Plaid album. Really nice guy. But at my core, I was always a Duncan guy. I just was. And I even told the story to Seymour how when I was younger, I'm originally from Connecticut, and it's a great place to grow up. The people are probably much like Canada. The people are legit. There's just not a ton of opportunity there. So what ended up happening was my dad realized I was really into music. So it's this long sort of story, but he got me a job. He did carpet installation, and he was the guy. And so they wanted him to do the store, and he's like, I'll tell you what, I'll do the store, but you got to give my kid a gig. And the guy's like, what are we going to do with a 13-year-old kid? Or 12-year-old? I may have been, I may have been 11. Who knows? And they're like, we don't want that here. That's just a liability for us. And he's like, well, so he pulled out, dad negotiations 101, and he got me basically a job in the place. The guy's name was Ray D. Champlain, and the place was called Creative Strings. I want to say Wethersfield, Connecticut. It could be Newington. I kind of forget a little bit, but so I ultimately worked there, and what I would do is I think I made $5 a day, but it was for me, my dad's whole point was he wanted me to get around musicians. He wanted me to be kind of submersed in it as best we could. It was Connecticut. There was, either your choices were go to New York to work or join some cover band. And, so I remember working all summer, and I think I bought a 59. And that was my first pickup.
Wow.
And so I told Seymour that, and I said, I got to be honest with you, I'm just going to keep buying them. He's like, well, we should just endorse you and save you. So let's cut out the middleman. And I think that was around, I think I was like 17 or 18 at the time. And that's it. Ever since, I've always just used their stuff. So that's it.
I remember because you were playing Ibanez first, like when you're holding an Ibanez on the cover of Plaid, right?
On the first, it's the first album is an Ibanez. It's an RG 550. And what ended up happening was this story's been told 1,000 times, so feel free to zoom forward. But I worked with this place, Creative Strings, but my dad, I had been there for like 4 or 5 years, and it wasn't really. Once you're the kid sweeping the floor, you're always the kid sweeping the floor, And so my dad's like, well, they're not seeing you for what you are. You should go. And it was nothing against them. It wasn't their job to. It was just I was grateful that they gave me the opportunity they did, to be totally honest. So let's perspective that one out. But my dad went to Bryan Guitars in New Haven, Connecticut, and Bryan was known in Connecticut. He was he was like a business phenom, and he looked like Donny Osmond, good looking guy, full head of hair. I mean, he looked the part, always wore like custom jeans and stuff. And so my dad says, you should hear my kid play. He's definitely different in what's going on. And, maybe I'm his dad, but I feel, this kid's got something. And he's like, yeah. And he just didn't want to hear it because every dad comes in there. But then about, I don't know, maybe 6 months later, I went in there to buy a Marshall cabinet because I wanted a Marshall, and that was the only place I could get them. And so I was behind like this wall of amps, and I'm playing. When I was young, I was kind of smaller, I'm not small now, but I was small then. And so like this crowd forms, and he comes out and he's like, who's that playing? And my dad's like, that's my kid. And what ended up happening was Brian got me an appointment with this guy named Rich Lasner at Ibanez Guitars, and this is when they were just coming up. So
I remember Rich. Yeah.
Yep, Rich, super nice guy, and he actually gave me my break, to be told, in a huge way. And they had Paul Gilbert, they had Joe Satriani, they had Steve Vai. This was during the Eat 'em and Smile era, so this was like, you know, Vai sitting on top of pyramids with guitars that have, you know, handles in them and they're day glow yellow. And I mean, we were just like, that's amazing, you know. I mean, dude, he made the guitar talk with a wah pedal.
Right.
You know, so we were like, dang, that's awesome. And so I ended up going out to a NAMM show, and I played for Rich, but I played on a Sunday, and I was nervous, so I forgot to pick. So I just played with my fingers. I was like, well, you know, I got to make it work. And it was crazy. That was my first NAMM show, which I flew myself out to. And my original boss, Ray, was like, listen, we'll hook you up with a room. We'll let you stay with one of the people here. So, if, you know, everybody kind of like was really trying to help me in their own way. And that was not lost on me by any stretch. So
what year was that? Like that NAMM
show? I was 15, and I'm 50, not 15 now. I'm 52 now. So I'm not one of these people that's great with dates, to be told. I'm sure somebody with a calculator or
87 or so, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably around that era. So, you know, so I go out there, and I don't know, back in the day, the NAMM show, first of all, for people that don't know, is the National Association of Music Merchants, I think, NAMM. And so, you know, to simplify, you know how you have like a car show for cars and a boat show for boats? Well, this was just the musical gear show for gear. And it was great because this was pre-internet. So the way you would, you know, the way you had to do everything in person, they would basically, they did one in January, one in, I think, June or July. And you would go there, all the people would fly in from the country, and they would place their orders. They would show their latest wares, you know. So there's Ibanez with these, like, you know, Loch Ness green guitars with, you know, handles in it. And everybody was like, gotta have that. So that was how it's not so much that now, because the second everything went internet, it was just leveled the playing field. You didn't need to be anywhere. It was just, commonplace, but at the time it was the thing. So, and it was a great excuse. In all honesty, this was back when mom and pops could still make a go of it, which is sad because that was such a part of our upbringing. Just going to the store and just, you'd walk in there. And I mean, I remember I would work on a Saturday and I would ride my 10-speed, and it was like probably about 35, 40 minutes away. I didn't care if it was fucking hailing frogs. I was going to get there, you know. And I remember it was an interesting life lesson. The beginning of the day, I'd show up and the guitars were they had Kramers is what they sold. And this was just when the Floyd Rose hit. Like, you could not get a Floyd Rose unless you had to have a Kramer. They didn't sell them individually. And so I will never forget, UPS guy used to show and bring those, you know, the brown boxes of guitar cases, and he would stack them up. There must have been, I don't know, he'd show, when I rolled into work, there was maybe, I don't know, 20 of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A day, none. That's how hot they were. It was crazy.
Wow. So you'd sell all those on a Saturday, and
on a Saturday. Yep, that's it. Now I don't know if it was the once a week. I wasn't privy to the business, but that is not. There's no tale telling in my stories. They are just what they are, for better or for worse.
Dude, I find that so fascinating because it's like I didn't work. Well, I did work in a music store, but it wasn't the cool one that had the cool guitars. It was a kind of a more like a mall store that had like beginner guitars, and the nicest amps we had were PVs and stuff. But it was still a music shop. But I used to go Saturdays, and I would ride my bike really far to go to Mother's Music in Edmonton. And it was the same deal. I would go down there because they were a Gibson Fender dealer and everything. And they got Charvel. And it was like, oh my God. And I remember the first 4 showing up, and like I would go there on a Saturday, and it was like, that one's got a lightning bolt on it. And it was like, they just look so rad. I was like, oh my God, you know.
We couldn't get Charvels. Charvels were ungettable. I'll tell you, cool. Yeah. I'll tell you how I got my first Jackson, though. And after, that's pretty interesting. It was an interesting business negotiating tactic, I'll tell you that. Couldn't get them in Connecticut. They just didn't have them. So you got Kramers. And I'll be told, and here's the crazy part. They were such a big dealer that the guy, Dennis Berardi, came. Now, keep in mind, they had Van Halen, which at the time was, you also have to, it's very hard because you have to put things into perspective. It's kind of like right now, you have to realize when rock was, when we were coming up, rock ruled the world. Rock was the hip hop of its day. Rock was, so it was of the moment. It's kind of like, you know, when Karate Kid came out, everybody was like, fucking welcome to my dojo, dude. You know what I mean? Because that was the movement. That's what it was. Now it's just a little subculture of that. But at the time, that was moving. And also, keep in mind that we're kids. So you have, you're still in your idolization phase. It's like, oh my God, David Lee Roth jumped off the track. You know what I mean? You're just like,
Right.
you're still trying to figure out who you are, and all these things make an impression. So you have to kind of pepper that in with all these stories, because it really affects how things are perceived. It was, people didn't realize, like I was very influenced by the like Hendrix and all, because my dad was super into music. But you have to, kids today are like Hendrix, whatever. You don't realize that was the pillar on which the next one was built. So
Right.
without that, you got a whole different equation. And so I think, and it's just hard. Just as you get older, I have kids now. My kids were like, "What's a Van Halen?" I'm like, out of the car. We're done. That's it. Start walking.
Well, let me ask you, like, because, dude, I gotta say, like, I mean, you, to me, when your first record came out, I listened to it and I was like, how is this guy so mature sounding? And he's like 17. Like, you probably recorded it when you were like 17 or 18,
No, I
right?
did that first record when I was like 15, 16. I
15.
I started part of it when I didn't have a car, and I got my. Maybe I was just 16. It's hard. I'm getting old. It was at most it was 16, because I got my driver's license on my 16th birthday, because it's Connecticut and it's a wild place. And I was either going to work with Michael Bolton. That was really my main. So anyways, I ended up with this guitar company, and then that was not really the plan. The original plan was this guy Brian. I asked him. My dad was like, "Hey, listen, everybody knows you're the hot sauce when it comes to the management. Would you consider managing him?" He's like, "I've never managed anybody. I don't know." And I think he just liked the challenge. He saw, he knew that he could hear what my skill set was, and knew I had the work ethic. I was definitely a grinder, because my world, I was going to end up being like, probably a blue collar version of something. And like my part of Connecticut was not the Stamford part. My part was like, like the Deer Hunter meets Sopranos. Like that was kind of the vibe of the, I realize these are older references, but
so tell me, like, in that period, like you're 12, 13, 14 years old. I'm so curious about, how did you sound so fully formed by the time you're 15 or 16? Like your tone, your phrasing, your maturity, and your playing. You mentioned Hendrix. Like, what were you doing when you were 12, 13, 14 years old to get to that place where you sounded like that on your first record?
To be honest with you, I was just probably I was poorly copying things that I heard that I did not have. We don't have YouTube. We didn't have anything. If you wanted stuff, you had to go to the library. I mean, it was rough. And so I had the needle. So in short, here's how it worked. When I was 9, my dad gave me a guitar. We had a crazy, crazy, crazy upbringing. That's a whole nother podcast / therapy session. So when I was 9, I kind of had a guitar, but didn't really take any interest. I was going to be a BMX racer. That was my world. BMX was the shit. And that was clearly the better choice, because we all know how older BMX racers fare in the world. I was like, let me do that shit. So I was totally that. And I ended up breaking my elbow. I had him cast it like this. I broke it on a go-kart, of all stupid things. And I had him cast it like this. And so what I would do is, I was so bored because I couldn't ride the bike anymore, because, I can only go so far. Because when you race the bike, you're pedaling so hard, the front end really doesn't touch the ground. So, so the second, what happened was I ended up casting it. And then at night, I would just pull it out of my cast and just go like that. And I could at least play guitar a little bit. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so then I kind of realized, guitar's cool. And then it took whatever, the 6 weeks to heal. And when I was young, I was very fast. I was leagues ahead of the competition for whatever reason. And then now everybody kind of starts hitting puberty. You know what I mean? All of a sudden now I realize that the challenge, much like in life, is like when you're in the pack, it's getting out of the pack is almost nearly impossible. If you're ahead of the pack, you're okay, because you're not dealing with the pack problems, pack mentality. So, I was so fast off the gate that I would cruise ahead, and it was great. And then I took 6 weeks off. And so then one arm was naturally, it was my left arm that broke. So my right arm, which was naturally stronger. So when I would ride, the bike would start veering, because and then honestly, right around that time, everybody started getting good. And then I was kind of then I was in second place, having to fight it out for first. And I realized, this is kind of work, but it was great, because it was in its own way a great life lesson. It's almost like, what's the old story with the fisherman on the wharf, and someone says, "Hey, your crab's getting out," and he says, "Don't worry about it. The other crabs will pull him back in," and that is kind of very interesting. It's much like that with careers and relationships and everything. So it was a great learning experience without realizing. But long-winded story short was that I decided to go more into the guitar, and I was around 13 because I think I got my like expert license. I was going to be an expert racer at
Okay.
Silver City BMX in Connecticut, and I was good. I was like, I don't know. I was thinking I was like third or fourth in the country. I think.
So this is kind of telling. It sounds like at 12, 13 years old, you're displaying a pattern here of sort of not half-assing anything. You're like way into what you're into.
Yeah, I was fully in. The guitar was the sideshow, and then I hit that. So from 13 on, from 13 to 15, that was the sound. I just figured it out, whatever it was. And it was me trying to. So also here's another thing, which is a pro and a con. So I call this the David Lee Roth pendulum, meaning. Which is kind of like it's kind of like I explain. This is how I kind of describe my dad. My dad was originally from France. He's from Europe, and he is a wild fellow at his core. And I think I don't know if it's the European approach, but their approach is point A to point B straight. That's it. There is no the U.S. is we massage. Hey Pete, nice to meet you. Hugs, kisses. Let's get together. Let's be buddies. My dad's like, hey Pete. Haven't seen you, just he's dead straight with you, then he walks off. You're just like, whoa. So it can be a stern handshake at times, but you know what you're getting. And so for me, there was an element of that. So the pendulum effect was this. I worked at that place, Creative Strings, which was a great spawning place. They were very much kind of jazz influenced. That was kind of their thing. So, and of course I liked all those guys. They were really nice to me, and I wanted to be like them. And they were very much into like Spyro Gyra and all this, McLaughlin and all that stuff. So they were like, jazz is the shit, and rock, that's okay, but that's for the common folk, you know what I mean? That was kind of the undertone of it. And it was all playful. There was nothing, none of this is negative. It was all just, and I was like, what? I'm like, have you heard Randy Rhoads, fool? You know what I mean? So I would come in just to be the contrarian, I'm like, I'm playing them, Johnny Winter, all this stuff. And I'm like, fuck you guys, you know what I mean? Like, and so we just went back and forth. And can I swear, by the way, or will I get in trouble?
I don't know.
I'm trying not to swear. It's not a good look. I just, it's hard when you grow up in the woods, but, so anyways, so what happened was I started kind of developing thing, and my dad was like, hey, whoa, he goes, you're kind of onto something. And I was like, well, I'm going to start, let me start learning all this other fancy stuff. And my dad was like, pump the brakes. He's like, listen, you can't serve two masters. He goes, you should really kind of, just be aware that for everything that you bring in, it's going to change. I guess his point was, if we didn't play by the rules, because we weren't raised that way. And honestly, I didn't know what the rules were. I just showed up and did what I thought was right, and then I had everybody, griping at me going, oh, you can't do this. You can't do that. This is wrong. That's wrong. And I'm like, is it though? You know what I mean? And so that was an advantage to me. And my dad's point was, hey, if you start learning all the rules and you start pulling from the same sources of everybody else, it's going to affect your overall outcome for better or for worse. So I purposely went the opposing way. I was like, I'm going to be a straight bare knuckles rocker. That's it. That's all. I'm not going to waste my time learning this stuff. I don't want to. So I just figured my path out, went down. And honestly, that at my core is who I am. At the end of the day, I'm just a rocker out of the gate. That's it. I love all the other stuff. And I've definitely grown an appreciation for so much more stuff. And I really do like a lot of the other stuff, to be totally honest. But at the end of the day, man, you hear those old Billy Gibbons licks, and I'm just like, oh, damn. You hear some jams.
Like Hendrix, Billy. Who were some of the other guys that you were?
I liked Peter. I liked Pat Travers. I liked, and of course, then but I was always a rocker guy. Like, so when I would wake up in the morning before we would go to school, this is how crazy our house was. My dad, who was doing carpets, he was also kind of like a I want to say an audiophile, but we didn't have any money, so I guess a Sanford and Son version of audiophiles. But he would every morning I would wake up to something new. One morning it would be Joan Baez. The next morning it's Minnie Riperton. The next morning it's the Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore. Then it's Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind, and then we're going to James Taylor, Sweet Baby James. So, but it was always the good stuff. My parents, both of them, they're both musical. They always had an innate ability to figure out we're listening to James Brown, we're listening to James, James Cotton. I mean, all this, they always like my dad, like I'd be like, is this the record? He goes, nah, that's garbage. That's when they got this is the one you want. You know what I mean? Like, listening to early Fleetwood Mac, all that. So they innately knew the stuff. So my reference point was always kind of like the good stuff. And that was what I pulled from. And so I just mixed that in with my kind of, I knew I just wanted to be a brawler on guitar, to be totally honest with you. I did not, the other stuff just didn't hold my interest. So that is how I got there that quick, because it was just a mainline approach. Now, bringing it back to the pendulum effect, I will say, going back in time, I do wish I spent a little more time learning some kind of theory or took some lessons, because it would really help me. So like, which so
me too, man. I mean, I do.
Yeah, but I'll watch you and I'm just like, what is going, like in my mind, it's like you're reading a book that I don't even understand the language, So I get the end game. And I think the reason why you've always kind of been on my radar is I always thought you were like one of these guys, kind of like I looked at like the session guys, like they could do all this and do all that. The problem is they left me cold. Your stuff never did. Your stuff always had like a musicality to it. There was always like a character to it and a musicality that always registered, because, I think I ran into you at a NAMM show years back, and then we kind of met again and again, but you were always on the radar for that exact reason. So for better, for worse, for what it means or doesn't mean, that's kind of always been, you've always kind of had the versatility, but yet with the personality, like you kind of got it. I never felt like, oh, this is a schooled guy that's going to run through his table of contents and he's going to get the job done and walk out. I never felt that. And I think that's maybe why we got along, because I think there was like that respect thing, like, this guy, that's rare.
Man, thank you. I mean, it's almost like I couldn't mirror image that comment any, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I feel the exact same way about you. Like, I mean, from day one, from hearing your first album, I was like, that's why I was saying, like, the maturity, the phrasing, the tone. It's like, there was guitar players that could play, like, you know what I mean? Like the craziest, like, what are sweeping this and that and that and that. But when I heard you back in the day, I was like, that's so musical. And that's resonating with me in a way that, like, you had the chops and you had it was always utilized in such a way where it really resonated musically. Like, it was like, that's cool to like, oh, that's saucy and just cool to listen to. It wasn't just like, here's somebody doing their bag of tricks, where it's like after 45 seconds you're like, okay, that's cool, but if I'm losing interest for some reason, you were just in service to the music always, and the music was interesting. And so that for me was
I think that's kind of, which brings almost full circle to the way things are now. It's like, I thought guitar was going to kind of completely dip out, and it didn't. It almost like kind of went away and then came back like crazy. And so the interesting thing, and I realize it just sounds like, it's you don't want to sound like old guy yelling at the clouds either too, but the truth is the truth. And I think, like, I just got interviewed from, I think it was Guitar World, and they said, who's got the best solo? And I'm just like, I go, who's got the best solo? Probably some kid from China, that's literally like 6 years old, that's just crushing it, that's doing some amazing feat that you'll never even understand. And you'll be totally blown away for about 59 seconds. And then you'll completely forget what it was. And so that, I guess, is the byproduct of things being what they are now. And so I guess at the end of the day, regardless of the situation, regardless of all the circumstances, I think the cream kind of rises, and I think there's a reason why certain people are, because also I think there's a difference. And what I will say here, even publicly, because I don't know if people tell you this, but people don't just like you. I think people respect you. And I think that's the difference. Whereas there's a lot of people, there's a lot of, like, at the end of the day, there's every now and then you get a couple players where you're like, for example, every time I talk to my friends, like, nobody wants to challenge Eric Gales to a guitar duel. You know what I mean? Like, class, I think I'm just going to let that one stay there. So not only do people like him, but they respect him. And I feel that, and I don't know if people tell you that, but that's kind of always been a thing when I've talked about people, in hushed quarters, whenever your name came up, people are always like, yeah, there's always that nod. And the interesting thing was that if you really want to be famous, so let me tell you this to all the people out there that think they want to be famous. You think you want to be famous, but you don't. Because the problem with being truly famous, like Justin Bieber famous, let's say, is that you have to be famous with everybody. The people you like, the people you don't like, the people you respect, and the people you don't respect. And what I realized is that I wanted to be, known, but I really wanted to be kind of like, I wanted to have the people that I respected give me the nod, like, nice. You know what I mean? That to me hold more weight. Like, I know when I played in certain, like when I joined Poison for a hot minute there, it was like, I was revered for the position, but they could have very easily on Monday taken me out of that position and put you in it. And then on Tuesday, you're the guy in the hot seat now. And then on Wednesday, we take you out and we're going to put, so it was kind of like the girl that was very pretty that would date everybody. Just like, meh, you know what I mean? It didn't have any oomph behind it. So for the people out there that think they want to be famous, just know that that's what it truly is. And that was, it was worth joining that project if just not to get a look from that perspective alone. So
that's really interesting. That's an interesting take, because I was going to ask you about that period. And
it was different. You couldn't. It's weird. You're playing stadiums. Stadiums felt cold. I didn't like it. I really liked clubs and I liked theaters.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Anything past the theater, I just was, it just felt like, I mean, you're playing, you look over and you can see the catering in the background. You're like, it's just a weird.
The stage is higher. The people are a little further away.
You've got the 15-foot barrier, and then you've got security, so it's weird. And then it's also the thing about crowds, which is really interesting, is they can get out of control real quick. It's like a fire. It's almost like there's a threshold. Like a fire is a thing up to a certain point, and then it hits a threshold, and then when it hits that threshold and you can't control it anymore, get out of the way. It's brutal. And I know, because I jumped in a crowd in Brazil. I tried stage diving.
Oh, well, that'll be
Brazil. One of the ways, the best fans you're ever going to get is Brazilian fans. They are so
gnarly.
Awesome. It is painful. It's a great culture. They're great people, and they love it. And they love it for all the right reasons. And it was one of the best experiences. But I literally, and I kid you not, was almost beaten to death publicly. I was flogged publicly on stage at a jumping off stage at a Poison concert. And then it was also the things you don't realize. Like no one, like it's hard to explain, but like I jumped in the crowd, right, and it was brutal. It was a brutal thing. And I get back on stage, I crawled back, and the only thing left was I had one Chuck Taylor on. I don't know where the sock went. They got the sock off me. I had one Chuck Taylor on, and this was like during the Pantera era where everybody was wearing the board shorts. And so luckily underwear gone. Don't know what happened to that. But the board shorts were on, and somebody had given me Jack Bruce had given me a watch, and I ended up making a fist, and I ended up keeping the watch. But everything was torn off, and I'm like torn and rattled, and I get on stage and I like literally trying to play it cool, and I'm waving, and then I like limp off stage. And then the interesting part was the tour manager comes to me and says, "You cannot do that again." He says, "You don't realize this, but as fun as that was," he says, "if you get hurt, I'm out of a job. See that guy's going home. You see those people, they're going home." And I realized, so you can't throw it in the audience. Somebody will take it, hit somebody else with it. Somebody gets hit in the eye. So it's not what you think it is. And
sure. There's a super chat here with somebody with a question. I was going to ask you about this as well. We're jumping all over the place here, but that's okay. It's Arthur. He says, "I'm actually sitting here playing my Samick Radio 10. I remember these guitars well. They were your signature guitar that you did with Samick in the 90s, in the early 90s. It's been gigged hard, but still sounds and plays killer. Did you ever notice that Eddie's guitar shape was similar to this model?" I guess it was kind of similar to the
I mean, at some point there, every guitar is similar to every guitar. I mean, I pretty much guarantee you, Eddie was not sitting around going, "What's Blues's model look like?" That I can assure you.
But they were really cool guitars. They were a good guitar, and you could get them for a reasonable price too. I remember that, and they came in some great colors, and they were really fun.
And it was they were a great company to work with. They were primarily they would kind of did OEM for other people. They made pianos. So it was an interesting choice, but I liked them. I met them, and they were. I really liked those guitars. And as an artist, the only thing, like, I don't use any of that. I don't have any of that stuff now. Every one of my guitars, I believe it or not, when I bought my very first house, I sold every guitar except for one. I sold them to the Hard Rock Cafe.
Really?
My friend Mike Tempesta actually knew his brother John was playing, I think, in White Zombie at the time, and he had a lady there that was really nice, and she was a fan. So. Anyways, through the Tempestas, I met this lady. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. It's been a minute ago, maybe 30 years ago or whatever it was. But very nice. And she's like, and it was interesting. It was at a point where, for me, which is and we'll get to I hate to talk around the Radio 10 thing. But so what happened was I kind of did 3 albums. I had toured. I played in all these bands. I played in stadiums. I had kind of done it. And I'm a kind of a weird type fella where it's like, once I've kind of seen the movie, it really doesn't have any interest to me. Like, I would have like rooms full of vintage gear. And then one day I walk in, I'm like, I don't want all this old stuff. Doesn't stay in tune. Got rid of it all. Then 2 years later, bought some stuff back. So I'm kind of like, for me, it's the thrill of the experience and the challenge. And so I kind of felt like I'd been to so many NAMM shows. I had done the guitar models. I had been in the magazines. I had won an award. I had done whatever it was. I had done it. And and what I realized, at my core of my DNA, that wasn't me. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't a guy that wanted to stay in that world. And that's how I went to the TV and film thing. Whereas I had dinner with Steve Vai. He is that guy. Like, he lives, he breathes it. And I realized in talking to him that he is so sincere to his art that I was like, it was kind of one of those moments where I'm like, I'm not that into this, And so I went the other way. And so I got rid of all my guitars. I never even wanted to do guitar records. I was supposed to, it was just a chance to get out of Connecticut. It was like the next step. I love the guitar. It's not that I wouldn't have done it, but it was never my primary goal. It was just because a light was shined on it with the magazines and all the stuff. People perceived, they're like, oh, he's that guy. I was never that guy. it was just a skill set that I had that I threw out there in hopes to better my situation so I could move on to other things. And so I got rid of every guitar, and I remember I kept one gold sparkle guitar at the time. And whenever I was doing a lot of sessions at the time, and I would always go up to Dweezil's because he lived not far from me. And he was always very cool, let me borrow whatever I wanted. So I'm like, hey man, I don't have a Les Paul. Can I borrow a Les Paul? He goes, yeah, okay. And I need a Strat. He's like, okay. As a matter of fact, this is how cool he is. I was doing a session for this. They wanted kind of like these Stevie Ray Vaughan type things. It was for a music house way back in the day, I think. And I needed a Strat. I didn't have a Strat. And I said, I just need to borrow a Strat, but it's got to have big frets because I got a lot of bending. He's like, well, just grab the one in the corner. And I grab it. And then, and I didn't even have a case. And I said, hey, should I take a case? And he's like, yeah, I guess grab that case. And then when I got it home, it was the Hendrix Strat. Didn't even care. He was like, okay.
I was wondering if that's where you were going.
No, it was that, because I wasn't painted, because he had somebody that were kind of like had been painted. I literally, we were like, I think we were jamming AC/DC, and I was like, oh shit, I need a Strat. I got to do this thing tomorrow. I was like, hey, just grab that one. Like, that's how cool he was. Never gave a shit. You know what I mean? And
he's a great guy. He's really cool.
Yeah, super. Like, but he's just generous that way. Was never precious about it. And because of that, everything, and so I think it was a 3-day session doing the Hendrix Strat,
Awesome.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it had big frets. I would have taken the Squire if it had big frets. It just happened to be that one, and,
I played that guitar up at his place, up at the old place, the original studio, and it was really cool that he let me play.
Yeah, I think it was the 60s, had a different neck on it. But anyway, so I got rid of everything, and I didn't even. So my point is, I purge, and so what happens is, like, just as an artist, like, I'll wake up one day and be like, totally done with that, and then I just never go. I'm never going to have another plaid guitar, because that was just a moment in time, and I enjoyed that moment, and I've just moved on. So it has no value. I've had people call me saying, hey man, this one guy, I know the guy that has my original white RG 550. It's a guy he actually did would do my guitar work. He was a master luthier in it's a guy named Jeff Moline. And I guess I forgot. I guess I sold him the guitar at one point. Who knows why? Probably because I was just done with it. And then he called me back maybe a year ago, and he's like, hey, Blue, I haven't talked to him in a while. He goes, hey, I found that guitar. I've still got it. He goes, do you want it back? He goes, you can just have it. Like, how cool is that? The guy was going to give me back the guitar that I sold him 30 years ago. And I was like, nah, man, just take it, sell it, do whatever you want with it. Like, I'm done, So my point with the Radio 10s, they were great guitars. I really liked them. I spent a lot of time. They had really nice necks. They were kind of like wider, flatter, kind of like a real beefy Charvel type neck. Because one of my original guitars that I learned to play on was a Jackson Soloist. So I've always kind of had a thing for those. And they're great guitars. They were really cool. And I used them for the time I used them, and then that was it. Then I was done. And as a matter of fact, I used them all the way up until I met Sterling and the guys from Ernie Ball. And that's how I ended up at Sterling Ball, because Dweezil was friends. We would go golfing with Sterling. And I remember golfing with Sterling, and we were terrible. Dweezil was a good golfer. I was a horrible golfer. I show up at this like this super posh country club, and I've got like the crazy hair, and it was in my face, so I just took like a tube sock and I tied it back, and he was looking at me like this. Like, we're in like Shishi Golf Club, He's like, "Are you really walking in with the thing?" I'm like, yeah,
No.
So, anyways, that was how. And so the long and short of it was that Sterling was like, "Listen," and I was he just knew I kind of had lost the passion for doing it, and I was working all the time. I just didn't want to go down. What was I going to do? A fourth record? Another endorsement, go to another NAMM show. Like, it was.
Well, that's interesting. It's interesting that you say, obviously you moved into, because some people might not know this, but you moved into film and TV composition and that whole world, which is obviously, I'm sure, probably, I know it's probably more difficult now, but it was, I'm sure, a lucrative way to go. And that's kind of this wide open creative space where you can do music and but you're doing everything, right? I mean, you're composing, you're not just playing guitar, which is much more sort of a narrow path. And you get to kind of do it without you've mentioned some of the things about being famous and some of the people might have misconceptions. You get to make music and have a career at it. And with this great big wide open creative kind of, space that you get to work in, like what's the downside? It's probably
the downside is you're behind the camera. So if you're doing it for the glory, meaning, listen, if I want to go play a show tonight at, wherever club X, you're not going to have lines around the block because you've left that,
but it sounds like you were okay with that.
I was ready. I was done. And also just ask, I was getting older. And then what happened was, the girlfriend becomes a wife. And then we were like, well, if we're going to do that, we might as well, let's have a family. Then, one kid turns into two. And then that honestly, really, once again, I like to just really take things. I wanted to be that dad that was there. I want to be there, so I didn't want to tour as much then. It was really, and then what level of touring, of course, is if you're touring with Paul McCartney, it's a different world than touring in the back of a Sprinter van, So for me, and then also like, my mindset changed, meaning everything when I was doing really good, and I came from making nothing. Like my world was always this, like I've grown up with every vintage guitar I can possibly really like. I've had 59 Pauls, I've had 63 Strats, I've had 62 Strats, 59 Strats, I've had Blackguard Tellys, I've had so many of them to the point where, because at the time, one, I was a kid, so that was part of it. Two, I didn't really appreciate them for what they were because I was still trying to bend them to do Van Halen on them, which is not necessarily their forte. But at the time, you could get them. This was pre-internet, and they were, if I remember correctly, Strats were around 500. Strats and Tellys were 500 for a 50s or early 60s. Nobody wanted anything from the late 60s or 70s at all. Couldn't give them away. I mean, literally, I'll give you 6 1971 Strats are like, nope, you know what I mean? And then Les Pauls were always a grand, except for the Norland ones. The Norland ones were like nothing. At one point, they went up to like $300. And I remember buying them because we wanted the Charvels and the Kramers so we would just have them. But in my world, what would happen is we'd buy them. I'd keep it about 2-3 months. Then the rent was due, and it was like, yeesh, okay, we'd dump it, and then I'd get the next one, and so and then we'd have that. So over the period of like 5 years, I'd have like 8 of them. You know what I mean? But could never afford to keep them, and could never afford to keep them parallel with each other, meaning like I'd have one Strat, I'd dump that, and I'd get a Telly, and then I'd run out of money, So, and at one point, I had this is a great 59 Les Paul story. My dad actually had it. He bought it from his friend, and it was a pristine 59 Paul. It had a quilt top, and it still had color in it. It had a great neck. The neck felt amazing, and I had it on my first record, but it sounded like a Les Paul Deluxe. It was just a tone dud. Like it was definitely it was a donkey, man, for sure, and
wow.
So, and the crazy part is, and at least, it didn't have the cup. My dad's friend who had this 59 Paul, which I've been trying to buy for like, I think I've made 4 offers on it, and I'm done. I'm out. Like, it's just like, it's one of those things where he's also a very close friend of the family. So it's like, you throw what you got at it. If it happens, it does. And now that I'm just older and I've kind of had the thrill, it's not there anymore because I've had those experiences, and 2, at this point with those numbers, it's like, dude, come on, calm down. You know what I mean? So,
right.
but I was never in a position where I could do it. So that was always the thing. And then it's like, okay, you're going to do it. And then you do it and you realize you're hot on it for like a week. And then you're like, fuck, man, the G string don't stay in tune, and it's sound, So, but anyways, so I got invited by Les Paul. He had heard my record. This guy who produced the record with me, we like worked together on it. Was this guy John Sticks, a really nice guy. Actually, at the time, I was like, I had a vision, and I didn't want anybody messing with my vision. So I was probably more combative with them because I was like, I know what I want this to sound like, and he was like, oh, and he would throw in his, his perspective, and I appreciate it more now. Now we get along great, but at the time I was like, just let me rock, Right. Anyways, he was very responsible for help getting me out there, which I could not be more appreciative appreciative of. And he played it for Les Paul, and Les Paul was really, he says, you should bring him down, have him come down to Fat Tuesdays and play it. The kid sounds like he'd be fun to play with. And I'm like, okay. So on a rainy Tuesday, we drove in from Connecticut, and I had a plaid Ibanez, and I had my mom's shirt, because I don't know why I was wearing my mom's shirt, silver shirt. They're doing like dive bombs and all this goofy shit. And he was entertained till no end. He thought it was hilarious. And so like I do the two-handed thing, but he'd actually do it pick in, and I'm like, oh damn! It was like the old bull was schooling me in real time. And,
what a memory! It
was great. He was great. He was hilarious. I mean, so
yeah.
But anyways, my dad brought the 59, and he said, I'm gonna have him sign it. And I'm like, okay, cool. So he pulls off the pick guard and he hands him the guitar. And I'm like, wouldn't you have him sign the pick guard? He goes, no, I want Les Paul to sign to Les Paul. My dad thought that'd be hilarious. So right under the pick guard, there's Les Paul signed it. So somewhere out there, if it was done in Sharpie, I don't know if it's still on there, but when you put the pick guard on, you wouldn't see it. But when you take it off,
that's so cool.
You get so somewhere out there. There's a 59 Paul with Les Paul signed on the bridge. Who, in my opinion, I don't love the sound of it, but if you love it and you paid for a house for it, then by all means, it probably sounds great to you. But anyway,
it all happened the night that you jammed with him, which is crazy.
Les Paul, it's the story. So my point, I grew up with all that stuff, so it changes. It changes that stuff moving forward. So now the thrill is a little different, and doing that. But yeah, that was the that was kind of that era. But ultimately, I left all that and went into TV and film because at the time I thought it was exciting to be able to buy a car. Then I grew up and I was like, wait a second, I wanted to go into TV and film because it was the difference between buying car money or buying house money, and then
right.
And so what ends up happening was just much like in life, one kid becomes two kids. We're in this, the house is getting smaller. We need a bigger house. And so I was like, I just kind of went to that. And what I realized is I could really move the needle. So for example, when I was doing my guitar stuff, it was cool. And I had a very I'm very grateful for people that have stayed with me over this time. I never had the biggest following. It was never like a Vi or a Satriani, but they were rock solid. They got it. All the people that really seemed to like it were the people that I kind of respected. So I was always very grateful for that. And that's why I never rushed the albums out. Everybody was always like, rush them out and do them. And I never did that. But anyway,
you still have that. I mean, here's a comment from Bebot that says, "Can you please ask Blues about his Yamaha signature guitar?" Like you've got people that are going to remember all these stages of
it's crazy. I don't remember this stuff. You guys remember it better than I do. Because part of me finds it's kind of sad to live in the past. It's kind of like the hot girl in high school, and then you see her, and it's like, I kind of it's always eyes forward for me.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Steve and that you had a conversation with him, and that was Steve Vai, and that was one of the moments when you realized, I want to do something different. Because Steve, to me, it's sort of almost the same thing. He, I remember talking with him about the Hydra guitar, which he used on this, this previous year, guitar with the 5 necks, and it's got all these different, it's got a neck with strings just resonating, and then a bass neck, and then he performs this piece on it where it's all these different, and he's like, well, I had to do it because he's like, I gotta do something else. I gotta move forward. I gotta do, so he was kind of within the space of his career where you say he loves it and that's what he lives for, but he still tries to, I feel like every year he you know what I mean? So it's kind of the same thing, but just in a different way.
Totally. And he's the guy for it, because at his core, I believed, at least from my experience with him, that's who he was. I could be wrong. Who, by the way, side note, I remember I was in France, and I think it was in France, and I was having dinner with. It was at one of these guitar things. It was T.M. Stevens was playing bass. It was a great bass player, great guy too.
Yeah.
And Steve was there, and I actually sat next to his wife Pia, who lived she grew up one town over from me. I think I was in Middletown. I think whatever the one Meriden or New, I forget which one it is, but. Just really I get everything about him is legit. His wife was super nice, just very nice. We had, everybody had a great conversation. That's how I knew that this guy's legit. You know what I mean? It wasn't this,
man.
And so, and that's for people that don't know, if you ever get a chance to meet him, he'll be, it's as advertised with him, and I'm not even that, in all fairness, I'm not that close with him. We've had interactions and we've had conversations, but I wouldn't even consider myself in his world by any stretch. That was just my observation of him.
Something about him that I've noticed, and I've tried to internalize it and really respect it. is he has a way of, when you speak to him, he asks you about what you're doing and what you're up to and what's new with you? What have you been? Oh, I
Right.
saw this thing you were doing. And you will talk to, every time I've met Steve Vai, 10 minutes goes by and you realize that he has been really inquisitive about what you're up to and what you're doing in your life. And you feel like, God, I've just talked about myself for the past 10 minutes. And I
Oh yeah.
feel like, and it's almost every time. And it's so, he makes you feel really interested in, and special, and like you matter. And it's such a people skill. And I respect it so much that, and I don't know. There's very few people I've met that have that. He's just, and he's also got a way of, like, I know when it's probably time to go, because he's a busy, you
Yeah,
sense
yeah.
he's got a lot on his mind. He's thinking, he's got a lot happening and stuff, but he always gives you 100% of his attention. And then I always try and really respect that and go, okay, well, it was great to see you, and I should probably split because I know you're, and he'll be like, man, it was really good to see you. I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah.
And then he's on, and that's how every interaction with Steve is. It's lovely. And he's an incredible guy, actually.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know. I actually know, because I have friends that are friends, so I actually do know what kind of like behind the scenes, and that's why I think I'm also a fan. That being said, I haven't had that many interactions. I can only tell you, like I said, I can only speak on of what I've met, and my experiences have been positive, and
Yeah.
so that's which is interesting, because I've met so many people in this world that you would think are amazing, and they are straight garbage. It is rough, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Just or lacking any sort of, like, maybe they're great in the creative, whatever.
Well, I mean, I think,
lacking people skills and just
yeah, and then some of them are just garbage. I mean, I literally have spent
Pity
time with people. I'm like, wow, and it's hard because how can a person this talented, like, where you're like, you've been given this gift and you are just a really not great human being, and that's
miserable.
then you just learn to separate it. You're like, okay, well, I'm not, I'm not married to this person. I'm just dealing with it, But we just
Yeah.
came back from Japan, and I guess in Japan, which is funny. There's somebody said, if somebody in, because it's a very polite culture. We had a great time, and we we were like, wow, this is really was quite an experience. And so they say in Japan, if they want you to leave, they'll say, oh, you have such a nice watch on. You know what I mean? So, in other words, get rolling. So now, anytime my wife asks me to do anything, I'm like, oh, how's that watch treating you? You know what I mean? So it's just
amazing.
why that Steve Vai.
Yeah, Japan is incredible that way, because I've been told that somebody that worked there for a while, that was he was an English guy, and he was living in Japan working. He said, if they don't like you here, you'll never know.
Yeah.
They'll never let on.
I get it. It's a polite, like I said, it feels like there's a bit of a marriage of convenience. Like, I'm here, you're here. But I will say, anyone that's fortunate enough to get the opportunity, I recommend you try it. I took my kids there because I wanted to get outside of LA, let them know that everything is not, you know what I mean? Everything is not this or that. Like, Los Angeles has some very amazing things about it, but it has some really not great stuff, especially now, which is sad, because I've traveled the whole world and I chose to set up camp here, and it was what it was 30 years ago versus what it is now is very different. And I think a lot of people are kind of having a hard time realizing, it's like, just because the neighborhood was great 30 years ago doesn't mean it's great now. And it's sad, because the resources are amazing, and the talent and the people out here can be truly amazing. So, but much like anything else, you just got to kind of find the good stuff with that. But
yeah, I still love it here, man. I love it. I mean, I should say I love Japan. I'm going in 2 weeks. My favorite place on earth, actually. I can't wait to go. Just so looking forward to it. But I still love LA. I mean, I found my place. It is all about finding out because it's a lot. It's a mixed bag, and it's huge. And it's like, you just, whenever anybody comes to LA and they're like, oh, I hated it, or, oh, I really didn't have a good time, I'm like, well, where'd you go? Because it's because you can probably find your place if you just know where that is, but it's not easy for somebody just dropping in.
No, the best, what I tell people all the time is, like, the one thing about, even though Connecticut I was ready to go, like, every fiber of my DNA was like, it's time to exit, you know what I mean? But I will say this, I did know kind of who I was and what I was about when I was there. So when I came out here, what I would recommend is, if you're lost as a person, this is not the place for you. Do you know what I mean? If you know who you are and what you're about, then I think you'll have a different go of it. So I would say that, I'll be honest with you. I do feel on a lot of ways like, Los Angeles is like living in a cult, man. It's a wild place, so on so many levels, and so I think, but if you are who you are and you know what you're about and you're willing, you can't go to a party and then complain it's loud. Do you know what I mean? So I think you have to have an element of that to it. But the resources are great, and the talent pool is astonishing out here. I really feel like, you know, because I have to work with so many, I have to work with so many different artists because it's all TV and film. I have to work with different vocalists and all this stuff, and I bring people in, and I mean, the amount of talent that walks through these doors is brutal. I mean, it is really astonishing. So that part is I really enjoy that aspect of it. But yeah, I basically did the guitar stuff, did it to its fullest. So to answer your question about the Yamaha guitar, so let me just brief that one up. Rich Lasner gave me my break at a NAMM show on a Sunday. And for any of you that knew back in the day, the NAMM shows, it was basically a 4-day party to get away from your family back in, let's say, Michigan, or wherever. You fly out to LA, everybody looks great, the weather's great. And so Friday night at the Hilton was like party central. And so it was very funny because I flew out on a Thursday, I went on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so Friday was party, Saturday was like, wow, we are really feeling Friday night. And then Sunday was like, oh my God, I can't even look at the lights, you know? So it was like one of those things. And of course I showed up on a Sunday, and it was really interesting because this is why I really appreciated what Rich did for me. I would walk into the booths. So I had Friday and Saturday to walk around, you know, and so I'd walk in people's booths, and I was a kid. So I'd play guitar, and people would gather around, and they loved it, man. It was like the people at the booth would keep playing. So I could just go from booth to booth to booth to booth, and I'd play, and these crowds would show up, and they loved it because I was drawing traffic to their booth. But I wasn't walking out with any like endorsements or anything. They was like, oh man, that's great. You know what I mean? And I actually went to Rich on a Sunday at 11 a.m. I've still got the card. I think it's at 11. It was either 11 or 2. Forgot to pick because I was just nervous, you know, and played with my fingers. He's like, I like it. But he was very forthcoming. He says, listen, I really like what you're doing. He says, but here's the problem. I'm, you know, you're not giving me anything. I don't have anything I can go back to my people and say, hey, you know, you're not on an album. You don't have, you know, so how do you, you know, how would you benefit us? And I'm like, and so I was just kind of spitballing with him. And I remember saying, hey, listen, and I'm just at this point, I'm like, you know, I'm fighting for my life here because I want, you know, I've already spent 2 days giving away the milk for free, you know, and realizing, oh, I've got to do yeah. I'm like, and this is where, you know, I was kind of fairly savvy because of the way I grew up. It was a whole thing, and so I was pretty savvy. And I went to him and I said, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Yeah, I understand your point. You know, I said, but what if I were to make like a demo of this guitar that you could that you could send to your dealers and demonstrating the guitar? And he's like, that may work, you know what I mean? And so he sent me a guitar, which was the RG 550, the one on my first album cover, but it had the regular stock neck, a smaller neck. So I did these demos. I did this one song. I sent it in. He was like, dude, that's great. He's like, hey, do you think we can have a second one? And I was like, sure, you know. So I do a second one. And by this time, I'm kind of like, dude, a lot of work doing these things, you know. And
so
then
demo, you mean just audio, or was it video too, or was it?
Sorry, excuse me. I apologize for coughing in your ear. It was me with I had a green Clarion 4-track I lived in my parents' garage, and I had one room, and there was a drummer, this guy named Tom Pulsey from Newington, I think, and he was a great drummer. As a matter of fact, he was originally slated to be on my first record. We grew up, and he was great. He was a young guy. None of us could drive. I'd have to drive a bicycle to his house. We didn't have cars. You know, we were young. Is when I did this. That's where I get the timeline confused, because when I did the record, I didn't have a car. I would get, my parents would drive me. And then by the time I got the record, I had a car, but I think the record was already out. So I'm pretty sure I did the record either before or right during that. But so when I was 15, I was sitting he would play drums, I would play the bass and then rhythm guitar, and I would just mult it over, and then I would record the guitar. So I did these demos. And so the first 3 songs on my first record, Never Look Back, there with the white guitar on the cover, is the first demo tape that was circulating throughout the industry. So what happened was I did, and they came back to me and said, you got to do a 3rd song. And at this point I was like, I kind of felt like I had already earned the guitar at this point. Right. It's an RG 550. Let's calm down here. You know,
right.
Let's get some endorsement going. You know, and so I did the 3 songs, and what ended up happening was Rich sent it to Steve Blucher, because Steve Blucher was over at DiMarzio, and DiMarzio, the guy, Steve Blucher from DiMarzio, it was kind of circulating. The tape was circulating around, and it ended up on John Stick's desk, which was guitar for the practicing musician. And what happened was I didn't realize this, they had been waiting to launch a guitar, kind of like a little guitar record company, because they had the magazine that had all these, they had the magazine that had all the subscribers. So for them, it was kind of like easy peasy. They're like, we'll just put this product out. But they were real nervous about who to launch first because they knew there'd be a lot of scrutiny on it. So in essence, John got the tape and then called me and they said, hey, listen, if this is actually you playing guitar, we'd consider doing a record with you. And so I had to go drive in person. My manager and my parents drove me into New Rochelle, New York, and I had to play for John in his office because they didn't think it was me. They thought it was just they thought some kid had put his face on it because they just sound like an older player. So I played for him, and that's how I got it. And I got it because the Michael Bolton gig fell through. So that's how I ended up doing guitars. And,
okay.
And then to add this to answer a super simple story with a really long answer. When Rich left, I was with Ibanez, and the reality is I stayed loyal to the people more so than even the product, because Rich was the guy that gave me the break. Rich left and went over to Yamaha, and a new artist relation guy came in. And honestly, the new artist relation guy was a really nice guy, but he wasn't, I was kind of part of, Rich's team, and he had his own team. And it's kind of like when you're at a record label and you kind of get management change. You're like, we like the band, but we really like this new band. You know what I mean? You're like, oh. So I went to Rich, and Rich says, hey, if you, he says, let me make you a guitar. If you like it, then you should come over to Yamaha. And he did. He built me what ended up becoming the kind of like my guitar model. And so that's how I ended up over. So I kind of followed Rich. I stayed with him. And then at that point, I was there for a couple of years. And then Rich left again. I think he went to Modulus. And then it's tough because then I'm at Yamaha. I don't really have a point person. And so it was kind of and then after that, I ended up going to Samick. That's how I went, because at that point, Rich was at a different company, and it was, but so that's what that guitar was. And so at the time, that guitar model was basically me working with kind of their existing frame, because whenever you go to a company, for the most part, unless you've got at the time, Steve I had the juice because he was with Roth, and that was the whole thing. That was like the epicenter. Then you can do whatever you want and people will just cater to you. But I didn't have that I wasn't making those numbers. So they were kind of like, hey, here's our model. And I was like, okay, within that model, I like this, I like that, but let's make it to these specs. And so
I was going to ask you, how involved you got with, say, the Yamaha, and then going to, because
Samick was me drawing stuff on. I lived in an apartment. That was me drawing stuff on a piece of paper, and they just did it. That was great. The Samick was just like, hey, I have this wacky idea. Like, okay, cool. Yamaha was different.
Do you remember picking can you make me one in alder? Can you make me one in ash so I can hear the difference? Or pickups? How did you settle on a design and what?
Okay, the design, the body shape was an existing. The Yamaha was an existing RGX design. I think it was the closest to what I liked. The neck profile was probably off of one of the custom shop ones. At that time, I had built, because I had I was lucky enough, even with Ibanez, they would send me stuff from the Ibanez custom shop, so you'd get to try stuff. And plus, I had so many guitars because I worked at that music store. So my genius financial plan was that I will work all year, or work for 2 years, make $500, buy one Kramer, slowly trade that into 7 other Kramers. So in the period of 5 years, I probably spent about $6,000 on one Kramer guitar. Because it was just trade, take the loss, trade, take the loss. And that's how I ended up that. So I kind of knew at the time, I knew I wanted alder because that's what all the old Strats. I had all the vintage guitars, so I just morphed everything. I think I made it alder off the guitars, and the pickups my pickups have always been PAF style pickups. Those were always the ones I liked because they showed the true colors. Not all were great. I've had some horrible sounding ones, to be honest with you, but I liked it because at the time I knew if I could get the guitar to sound good, I could always make it sound bad with the amp, but I could never take a bad guitar and make it sound good ever. To this day, I've worked with every engineer like, don't worry, we'll fix it. I'm like, they can't fix it. If that shit sounds like garbage in the room, you're done. It's dust. Just throw in the towel.
It's interesting because alder is actually one of my favorites. And what my HSS version of my signature guitar is, and I always feel like alder is a great middle ground, for a body wood on a guitar. It's just kind of got it all. It seems to be in balance, and a PAF is similar. That's my Thornbuckers too. I mean, they're not too hot. They're not too, it's just and the true colors of the guitar kind of come through. So good piece of alder, nice PAF pickup. It's hard to go wrong, sort of,
Yeah. That's kind of, and then what I started doing for years, which I did, is I've always put maple on top, because I realized at the end of the day, I'm kind of like a Les Paul player that doesn't play Les Pauls, if that makes sense.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Dude. I mean, that's this guitar. I mean, or wherever the heck one is in here. I'm gonna grab one. I don't have one in here right now.
Quality problem, my friend. Quality problem.
Yeah, I thought I had one of my HSSs in here, but it's in the case tight. So because I took it somewhere. But anyways, you
and I have a great history with John Suhr. You don't know my John Suhr story, right?
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think you may. So go ahead. The people certainly don't that are watching.
Oh, it's great, John. So God, people are going to be like, people are probably nodding off at this point. But these are fun stories. Come on, no.
That's what we do here. We just rap.
Yeah. So what happened was, so we lived in Connecticut, and so here's how I got to it. I was playing at the time. You know, my dad was always really behind me. But both my parents were really trying to, do the best they could. We lived in the middle of nowhere, so there was like, so he's like, well, let me at least help him get the gear. So I was playing a Jackson at the time, a Jackson Soloist Custom, a blue one, electric blue with a Kaler. It's like, but it had a great neck. And at the time, my dad was like, all right, we got to make some leeway in this. Let's try and get you the best gear possible. Like, cause at the time, you don't know, you're like, well, you try and buy the game. You're like, you open up the magazines and there's Steve Lukather with this rack of stuff. And there's Van Halen with, you're like, oh, so at the time he's like, well, he goes, we're going to New York. So we hop in the car and we go to New York. And we're on 48th Street when that was still like it's in all its glory. And we would just go up the street, and I was familiar with it because we bought my Jackson there, which was brutal experience buying a Jackson because I got one before you could even get them. And they were so hot that this was how crazy it was. This is on the Jackson story, and we'll get to that one. But we roll in, it's my dad, his buddy, and me, and and I roll in, and there's the Jackson, which you couldn't even get these things. Mine was mine was one of the very, very earliest ones. Didn't even have a serial number on it, which I didn't realize till later.
Soloist, so neck through.
It was a neck through body. It's an electric blue, a neck through body, Pro Soloist Custom. Had an ebony board. It had the 3 little goofy toggle switches were totally useless, and it had the Homme single, and it had a Kaler because that's all you could get on them at the time. You couldn't get Floyds on them. You could special order them, but you couldn't. And I didn't know that was a California thing. I was some like hick kid from Connecticut. So we go in there, and there's the guitar. We ended up buying 2 of them. My dad's buddy bought one, and there was the electric blue one, which I had to have. And at the time, it was $1,275, which literally to us is like saying, if I said, give me $10,000.
It was a lot of money at the time. I remember.
Well, we didn't have anything. I mean, we were like collecting. We couldn't even get through the tolls. We were trying to, we were putting quarters. I remember putting quarters in dimes. We were stacking them. We had to plan our route home. That's the truth, So we get there, and my dad's also trying to show me this negotiating. He's always like, you never settle for the first thing. So he's like trying to talk him down. And the guy, I forget where it was. I think it was Manny's, or I don't know. I don't even remember where it was, to be honest with you. But the guy's like, listen, this thing is so hot. He goes, by the time you and your kid walk out of here and come back, he goes, I'll have sold that guitar. My dad's like, fine, I'll take it. Like in defeat, he was trying to get it. He was trying to, but of course, trying to be the dad he is, he's like, I still got to win one for the team. Let me show my kid how to negotiate. He goes, I'll take it, but you got to give me a free set of strings. And the guy looks around and he goes, fine. They're on the guitar.
They're on the guitar.
That was New York. That's how rough New York was, man. It was brutal. And
mine. I've had this since 1987.
What do you got? Look at you, man.
87.
Dang. Oh, I would have chewed through wire to get that, man. Look at that. That is legit.
It's got a city on it.
Dang. Is it got the good Charvel, that nice wide?
Oh, yeah. Neck? No, this neck is to die for, man. Actually, It's actually really great. The big old thick maple fingerboard, too, the way that they used to do them. And this guitar is actually exceptional. Like the way that the plates and the way they're perfectly countersunk or whatever, the neck pocket is you have to take this neck and push it into this pocket. It's like it was made for this body. There's no gap. It's perfectly smooth here. It's in whoever was making these guitars at that time, and I took this guitar a while ago to Suhr to have something done, and they looked at it, and one of the guys there, one of the like main builders there, was checking out, going, "Man, this guitar is really like well made." And I said,
plus you had a Floyd. I would have literally chewed through wire for that guitar.
Now I totally, like an idiot, I backrouted it because it was just the 80s, and so that just didn't have that originally. And then it was like, how do you get the bridge lower into the body so that because of the back route? I wanted the bridge. I always had a problem with Floyd's if they were mounted. Like I had a hammer and it was real high off.
Yeah,
the
me
body.
too. Me too. Mine, I need to be. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I hated that. Like a strat height sort of.
Yeah.
So they actually took the guy took wood off of the neck. So he went and he kind of like sanded the neck down so that it sunk deeper into the pocket. Bridge could go down a little lower.
Right.
Wish I'd never done any of that shit. I wish it was totally stock. But other than that, it's basically, you know.
Yeah, no, that's there. You were you had the VIP ticket. You know what I mean?
Oh,
But
man.
yeah, incredible. Those, because you couldn't get them. They were not commonplace where I was, for sure. You know.
Yeah, there was that one store in my town, and they'd get 3 or 4 in at a time, and they'd sell pretty regularly, pretty quickly. And that one I snagged, and when I was a kid, and mom.
I'm glad. It's amazing you still got it. I never, like I said, I never kept any of that stuff. As a matter of fact, I traded that guitar to a gentleman named Bill Deckelman for a 1968 100-watt Plexi that was bone stock, and I was technically by that point the third owner. It was so clean. It came had those big thick Revo casters, had these real thick covers on it. The cane was like, it was like brutal. It was so clean that when I popped it over, it had the acorn hats on the EL34s, and the only thing, not a single solder joint had been touched, and the only thing wrong with it is that the pilot light burnt out. That was it. And I tried, and I was like, oh my God, it's going to be Van Halen. I plugged that Plexi in and it sucked. I was like, I didn't know how to wrangle it. You know what I mean?
So do you still have, we haven't talked about amps at all.
I've got a shit ton of amps.
You got a shit ton of amps still? Yeah. So
I got rid of all the 100-watters because of this is before you could load box stuff. So you have to realize back in the day, like I would drive to New York, I'd have Henry Yee trying, because that's what Steve Stevens used, which his name never comes up. Like, I think people are sleeping on him. Not that they are. I mean, he's super popular. He's one of the, he's a world-renowned guitarist. I'm not saying he's not. He is. But I'm just saying, like, he is a monster Plexi player. And people never, it's funny. People never like think of that. I mean, I saw him play with 2 Park 100 watts. My ears are still ringing.
Wow.
He was brutal. He was great.
This was Henry?
No. This is Steve Stevens.
Stevens, right? Of course, I love Steve. I mean, Steve's like one of my. He's been such a good friend to me, and yeah, no, dude, he's and Henry Yee. I remember Henry Yee.
I talked to him, and so I tried everything, because this was back in the day. You guys have to realize now, which is actually, I think, to the detriment, to be honest with you. Like, I think now everybody's using the same recipe. Everybody sounds the same, and the reality is, so much of that sonic fingerprint was the sound. Like Brian May had that sound. You're like, oh my goodness.
Oh, dude.
I mean, dude, you can't, you put that through a Dumble, and you're like, what just happened? That does not work,
no, all day long, people with their signature tones. I talk about this all the time, and it was, you know what I think it is, man. It's like it was in hard rock guitar, at least, or rock guitar, the rock guitar genre. I think it was when a lot of preamp gain came into play, because all those guitar players like Brian, like Richie Blackmore, Eddie Van Halen, they all had a signature voice, and there wasn't so much gain going on, or they were using an amp that was like kind of like Brian's amp, it would sound like a wet blanket unless he had the range master. Yeah. And then you incorporate that and you get your signature sound. Rory Gallagher, same thing, right? Richie Blackmore, either cranked up AC30 in the studio, or the Marshalls with the Akai tape deck boosting. Like, they all had this unique little formula, but it didn't involve multiple 12AX7s kicking into one another in the front of an amp, which sort of, yes, it's easy to play. Oh, that's cool. That's fun. Very liquid, whatever, but homogenizes everything.
Yeah. I mean, you give to get. I mean, that's the thing. And so it's hard. And I think so what's happening is it's one of these, I think, where we're going, and it's just not, like I said, it's all music. I love it all. So it's not, none of this is bad. It's just that, if everybody's using the same spoon and the same fork, and it's like, after a while, it's just like, it just becomes, honestly, it becomes white noise. Like, for example, if you went to a Joan Baez concert, or let's say you went to an Adele concert, right? And all of a sudden Green Day got up and did one song and just cranked it, you'd be like, oh my goodness, that was insane. I went, and for that matter, if you went to a Green Day concert and you stopped in the middle of the concert and then Adele got up and sang a ballad, you'd be like, you'd remember it, correct? Right. But yet, if you sat there for the hour and 45 minutes of Green Day just blaring your ears out, it just becomes white noise. You know what I mean? It's like, dude. So I think what's happening is we're kind of in a version of white noise. Everybody's got the same stuff. Everybody's doing this. And listen, I've got my neural just like everybody else. That thing is an amazing invention. I highly recommend it. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, in order to color outside the box, I think that's why that's why I think bands like Queens of the Stone Age, that's one of the last times I've heard somebody really have like a thing. That guy, Josh, he ran with it. He did a thing, and it's his thing. You know what I mean? And I think he's kind of like one of the last ones to really do it, to be totally honest.
I played a gig with him. I got a great opportunity to play with him a couple of years ago at a benefit. And I got to do a couple Queens tunes with him, which was insane. Like, it's like, I cherish that moment of playing with him. But we also did he wanted to do Let's Dance by David Bowie. And he wanted to do, what is that song by Gary Rafferty? I think, I just want to say this is my way of telling you I can never, it was beautiful ballad. It was such a great, so we played that, really unique tunes, and then some Queens. He showed up with a, I want to say it was like it was a dual P90. I don't think it was a Casino. I think it was a Gibson with two P90s. That's what he played. Like a hollow body.
Yeah.
Like a 330 style guitar and an amp from like 1948 with like, looked like a radio kind of with it. And it was like, he's like, this is just like, I'd never seen one before. And that's what really unique, like little rig that he showed up.
I mean, our kids went to school at the same time. So like when you have kids, like you find yourself almost paralleling with kind of like parents, so it's really interesting. Cause like when our kids were going to school, we're like, what's up? We're like in the car line, dude, you know what I mean? And then you hang, and then your kids go to different schools, and it's like, I haven't talked to him maybe 4 or 5 years, you know what I mean? But the point is, I've been to his studio there, and when you see the stuff, you're like, really, dude? You're like, it doesn't, but it makes sense for him, because he's just, he's just approaching it differently. He's making it his thing. And I think that's what I kind of miss. Everybody's very good. I'll be the first one to say, everybody's so good technique wise, I don't even bother anymore. It's almost like, blah, you know what I mean? Like, like you watch like a Tosin, and you're like, this guy, what? He's like tripling, he's doing delay with his own hands. I'm like, this guy is from another planet. Like, he's already clearly got that so on lock that I'm like, I'm just going to tip my hats to you, sir, and keep rolling, because
I'll go do this other thing over here.
Exactly. Once again, I'm just going to stay in my lane, because there's no, it's just nuts, So, and it's not a bad thing. It's just that, it's as a matter of fact, I liked it. Everything's being pushed and exercised, but at the end of the day, either you move the needle or you don't. It's that simple, people. I don't know how to put it to you,
Well, I totally agree with you about the homogenization and that Ty Tabor. I mean, is another great example of like, once everybody found out what he's using, it's like, are you serious? Like a Gibson?
Is that what it was?
Yeah, lab with an active Defender that nobody wanted, with the active pickups, and it's like, that's what you're doing to get that amazing sound, and a MIDI verb. It's like,
I had this. I used to carry that MIDI verb around too. I had one. They were horrible. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, but he makes it sound like, $1 million. It was just amazing. So I totally agree with you. Hey, but on that note, did you see, and did everybody else see out there, the new Jack White amp? Did you see that?
Yeah, I've only seen it. That's what I'm talking about. That thing is
cool, man.
Cool.
Like, so freaking cool with the 2 power amps and the 10 and the 15. And
I wouldn't want to have to carry that thing. Trust me, as a guy whose dad built an amp, I have an amp that's sitting right over. It's like thing weighs. It weighs maybe 80 pounds. It's got
Dirty Boy.
Yeah, Dirty Boy, the original. I've got the very, very first one that he built on the table, and it has the Variac, and that came from back in the day. Everybody's like, "Why'd you get that sound? It sounds so big." And they always saw me with 2 amps. They're like, "Oh, you double." I'm like, I was only using 2 amps as 1 amp. So I would use one as a preamp and one as the power section. I didn't know about the I would Variac an amp, and it just sounded anemic. It sounded like it was broken. I was like, "Oh, this isn't good," And then
what did you do?
What I did is no one told me, because I was living in the Connecticut. It was in the woods, I didn't know you had to rebias the amp for the lower voltage. Never knew that.
So then it didn't sound good when you
right. So if you take a regular amp, just run 10 and drop it down to 60 volts, it sounds like a mosquito. It's weak. You lose all the punch. It's got nothing. Even when you drop it down to like 80 volts, like everybody's like, it just sounded weak to me. I didn't like it. You know what I mean?
You got to rebias. Yeah.
You got to rebias. I didn't know that. So the way I would get around it is, my dad figured it out that there's a way on old amps where you can break into the preamp section. And so it's real easy. You just lift one of the tabs off the thing there. And so I would use 2. So 1 amp, I would only keep preamp tubes in, and then the other one I would pull out all the power tubes. Sorry, one amp I pulled out the power tubes, and the other one I would leave the power tubes and pull out the 2 preamp tubes. So one amp, the only thing that's working is the phase inverter and your power section. So the only knob that works on it is the volume and the presence, because the presence is tied in. And my presence, I keep those things wide open anyways, because they're not, I don't mind that brightness. It's the treble brightness that drives me nuts. We've had that, the no bright cap debate there. So what I would do is I would run 2 amps. And so I would run into the 1 amp, which was just a preamp, which I ran at full, because I wanted that preamp real strong. And then I would just variac the power section. And that's how I did it. So I would just drown out just the power tubes. And that way it didn't sound as mosquito-y to me. It would just kind of lower the volume, and that's how I would do it. So I did that for years. I would carry 2 amps, which was a hassle. You'd have to connect them from some wire in the back, and it was kind of dangerous. You're playing with big boy voltage there. So my dad eventually was like, listen, why are you, and I kept blowing them up because they were always old amps like Plexis, and they started becoming worth a lot. And my dad's like, yeah, if you blow those up, it's going to be the whole thing. So my dad built an amp where it basically is that. It just only variacs the power section. That's what it is.
Got it. So I think part of what you didn't like about the variacing the whole thing wasn't just the bias being low. It was that you were lowering the voltage on the heaters of the preamp tubes as well. And so that low voltage on the heaters was, so you had the high voltage on the heaters out of the first amp, and everything's as it should be. And then you just brown out the power section of the other
and get rid of that bright cap.
And get rid of that bright cap. No, dude.
No bright cap. You're like, I love the bright cap. So that was how I did it for years. That's always why people are like, that thing sounds huge. It was always just 1 amp. And I just told everybody it was a backup because couldn't spend 10 minutes explaining the theories of variac law, So, and that was it. And then I would just hope it wouldn't blow up, and they'd always blow up, because those old amps were very, they were fickle. So amps, I've got, which we got off track. You got it. The John Suhr stories. You'll love that one. But so I've got a bunch of Plexis now, but I got rid of all the 100 watters because before load boxes, they were so unearthly loud, and I would just play them wide open. Yeah. So, because that was the only way you could get them to work, and they were pretty much unusable in 99.9% of the situations. So, but when I got to the point where I just started I had a bunch of 100 watters. I just got rid of them because they were unusable. You couldn't use them. And then because the load box back in the day, like when I was saying with Henry Yee and all this stuff, like he would do mods because I'd hear Steve Stevens and I could never figure out why that guy was always so ungodly loud. And I realized that's the only way it fucking sounds good. You know what I mean? Right. That's why his stuff sounded. I mean, he had the tight low end in the thing, and then he had the hairspray. It was just, the whole thing was like a 3D. It's kind of like if you go to the Sphere, you get like the audio and the visual. That's kind of how it was with his shows. So so I started getting rid of the 100 watters because they'd sit in the corner for years, never used them. I couldn't even give them away. No one wanted them. It's like, go try and get rid of a black-faced twin right now. Good luck. Nobody wants those things. I can't give them away. You know what I mean? I had a twin up to, for years. Finally, I think I traded it for, I don't know, maybe $1,100. Like it was like, vintage, real deal 64. I mean, it was, nobody wants the big boys. And now I want the big boys. That's all I'm looking for is 100-watt Plexis. And
we got load boxes now,
Say what now?
We got load boxes now that'll.
So now they're usable. Yeah, and now everybody, in all honesty, everybody wants digital. I'm like, you can have digital on that level. I mean, I've got the Neural, which is, I think, the top of the food chain for the digital stuff for sure. In my opinion, especially for the high gain stuff, their stuff is. And to be honest with you, what I use even more than the Neurals? I use their plugins a lot.
Plugins are great.
TV and film, because the problem with TV and film is you have to be able to recall stuff. Because a lot of times it's a decision by committee. So you'll hand stuff in. They'll be like, "We love this. If we only ... and you have to go back and change it. And I'm going to fire up the old vintage Plexis that will sound different on Tuesday than they do on Wednesday, anyways.
Yeah, it just pulls up and it works. I mean, I'm a huge Neural fan, and I'm a huge fan of their plugins for sure. Or like, man, some of the. I mean, it's just, they're really, really nicely done. I mean, it's just so elegant. They're elegant, like the layout and the
Cadillac of. Plus, and what I do a lot of times is for guitars, because it's the old battle. Like everything sounds great outside the box. The problem is you have to commit. For example, it's kind of like you have to go from studs on up. Meaning, if you're going to use analog, you got to go the whole ride. Because if you just try and insert it in, it becomes interesting. So a lot of times it's just best to keep stuff in the box. And so what I use Neural a lot for is, believe it or not, they're plugins for the effects. Their effects are dialed in for guitar so well, rather than sitting there and pulling up a lexicon reverb and weeding through 15 different things. It's like you just pop them on and you're good to go. You know what I mean? At least for sometimes getting a grand picture. And the way I work, which is another thing, like no one ever asks you this, but I want to ask you this, is like, because you do these things, you do a whole full song and a whole deal. Like, how long does it take you from beginning? Because I do that, I've done that stuff, and I know it takes me a minute. And I see you, and it seems like you're just like pop, 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 popped it out, one take and done. I'm like,
my tunes, it depends. It depends on the product and how deep I'm getting and how many different sounds. But it's generally speaking, many times what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll rough in something in an evening, and so over a couple hours I'll come up with an idea. And then I'll go, okay, great. I'm excited now. I can go to bed tonight. I'll go eat, I'll go to bed, and I'll get up in the morning, come back, and now I'll start really working on this. I'll come back and pull it up and listen to it. And then all becomes revealed the next day. It's like, oh, maybe that's not so good. Maybe I need to start over. Or usually it's like, no, that's pretty cool. And I'm excited about it. Okay, I can hear where this is supposed to go. And then I'll spend the day on it. And then generally by the evening, I might have it, the whole video basically done, but not edited. And then I'll edit the next day. So it's kind of like an evening of a couple hours of getting something started, the whole next day of tracking, recording, getting it roughed in, basic. And then my ears are burned. So by the end of the day, I'm like, I don't want to mix. I'll mix.
No.
I'll come in and I'll mix the song and the next day and do the video edit. And then it's done by, halfway through the day or something.
And then for your drums, see, I play all my stuff and then fix it in MIDI,
Oh, dude,
I've got good ideas, but I'm not an executor of. I haven't spent 20 years playing drums, So
do you have like a MIDI kit or something?
Yeah, I just got a little like V drum pad kit that I use.
Yeah, cool. I wish I could do that. I'm a shitty drummer, so I would love to be able to do that. But no, I use Superior a lot, which has a great, like in Superior Drummer, you've got this ability to kind of tap in grooves. So I'll tap in what I want. Like, here's my kick pattern, here's my snare. It spits out a whole slew of grooves that are very close to that with a percentage. This one's 98% as close as what you just tapped in. This one's 96. This one's 94. And then I was like, oh, that'll work. And then you can take that groove, pop it into a thing called the Song Creator. Okay. And then it's like, it'll spit out a whole bunch of verse ideas. It'll be like, here's the file that you just picked somewhere in the middle of the verses or the middle of the choruses. And then here's a whole bunch of intros, a whole bunch of verses, bridges, fills, outros, like everything. And you just piece together a thing out of that. And it'll be like, oh, this is great. And within like 20 minutes, I can have a drum track, basically.
Dang, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I spend hours on it, because I just have a vision, and I'm just like, that's what I want to see done. So I bend it to my will, basically.
I wish I could do. I'd love to have a little MIDI kit and be able to play it, but I suck, so I'm just not a good drummer.
Oh, believe me, you would never hire me to play in your band. Sure. But I have, I've played with so many amazing. I've been really lucky that way. I've played with some of the like craziest best drummers on the planet, and so you just pick it up. You're just like, oh my god, you know what I mean? You learn. You're just like watching. These people, you're like, oh, okay, but
sure.
But yeah, so yeah, that's what. So in essence, so my point is, yeah, I've got a bunch of Plexis, 50 watts. So I'm kind of done with 50. I definitely want some hundreds. And for me, here's the crazy part. I get a lot of my, I like I think Josh Smith asked me, he goes, would you rather have a good, an okay amp and a great guitar, or a great guitar and a great amp? I've got Ernie Ball, so I'm kind of already covered in the guitar. I already got greatness locked on that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I love him. But I would play a Squire Strat and play it through a great amp, and I'm there. It doesn't, because the amp colors so much. Like,
I feel the same way, man. Like the amp is a big deal.
It's the whole deal. And it's funny, everybody connects with the guitar. So everybody's like, this is my Desert Island guitar. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, and I don't get me wrong. I'm not underplaying the guitar. Of course but I'm just saying, like, in the equation, just like, for example, people never really look at speakers. Oh my man, speakers make a huge difference.
Total final filter on it's this massive veil on the whole sound that is,
So I just, I figure if you've got the amp, you're there, man, at that point, So I keep all I've got, tons of analog-y stuff as far as the but I also know what I'm going to do. Like, I also know, I know what works for me. Like, I go for a certain thing that I feel like, for example, this is the common thing. Like, for example, I must have played, and I'm not even kidding, maybe 15 Dumbles in my lifetime. I've played, that's a lot, and not a single one has ever really accentuated the better parts of my playing. They just don't.
Yeah, well, I get it. It's a thing. And when I play one, I played a really good one a couple weeks ago in Italy. And there was two actually that I played, and they were very different. One was super gainy and almost like a fuzz box. And I was like, I don't get it. And then the other one was like cool. I get it. It's like a smoother. It sounded a lot like this train wreck that I had here. That was magic. One of the best amps I ever played. A train wreck at Liverpool. It was kind of like that. It was kind of low gain, had to be quite loud, but it had this kind of magic top end. A lot of glass in the top end, so the notes would take off. And if you just put a screamer in front of it, a tube screamer with the level maxed, it was like, okay, that's all the lead I ever need. And it's actually, my guess is that you probably would have been like, huh, this one, I could be wrong. But for me, it was like, okay, this is a Dumble that I actually like, but for me, it's not that smooth. I know what because if you're a Marshall person, it's a different,
world. Yeah.
That's home base then.
Yeah, or not even. It's not even that. It's just. And it's not that I'm just a Marshall guy. Like I'd like to like a lot of Fender. Everyone kind of does what they do. It just my only point being is that I think I just look at it like, does this play to my strengths? You know what I mean? And for me, one of my Achilles heels is I have two Achilles heels. One is, and I love it, but acoustic guitar is brutal, man. I watch Billy Strings and I'm just like, dang, dude, nice on you. You know what I mean? I've got a bunch of old Martins. I just love the simplicity. You get a guitar, you pick it up. It's there. It's so just add water and go. I love it. I love the rawness of it. I love that there's no hiding. Like to me, I just love the acoustic guitar. I think it's cool. I suck on acoustic guitar. It's like squip squap. Because my style just doesn't lend itself to that thing. And my other Achilles heel is one. So if you're ever going to hire me to play acoustic guitar, make sure it's pretty basic. Otherwise, I'm calling you.
Dude, this guy used to hire me to play. He was such a nice guy. And I got a session with this dude once. He hired me to play fingerstyle acoustic on something. It was so funny because it was so like this, like exactly what you're talking about. Like and I'm so limited, but I went in and I did it. And then he just kept hiring me to do stuff like that. He'd bring me over the next couple of years. He'd be like, hey man, I got another one of those kind of tunes. And I'd be like, this is hilarious. Like this guy totally thinks this is my bag. And it's so not my bag. And eventually when I did something electric for him, I go, this is way more in my wheelhouse. And he's like, I had no idea you even do this kind of thing, like the whole electric guitar trip.
Yeah, I'll tell you the crazy story. And I forget.
And I love acoustic too, but I'm a hack.
I know. I'm totally. It's early for me, so I'm kind of spacing. Who is the guitar player who plays with Steely Dan? One of the many, the one that we all know. I'm just drawing a blank.
I am Elliot Randall or Larry Carlton or
not Larry Carlton. The other one he does the beginning. I just can't think of it. Oh, this will be so.
Like one of the session dudes.
One of the guys. He's famous. He's Randy something. I'm trying to think. I can't think of his name.
I can't think right now of anyone else.
Yeah, I can't think of it. I don't know. It'll come back to me. But anyways, there was a session. They were going to hire him, and they couldn't get him. They had to wait a day, and they're like, "Blues, we need you to come do acoustic guitar." And when I heard his name, I'm like, "Are you guys out of here? Just wait the 24 hours." Like, what are you thinking, man? And they just stop. You know what I mean? And then the other thing is, my other Achilles heel is if I get a garbage sound, I just am like, it's almost like kryptonite to me. Like that's why I hate to get up and jam. And it's not that I don't do it. It's just like you always show up and it's always like some goofy setup. And it's like, so I am so interactive off of the sound. And that's been a great thing for me and a bad thing for me. And now that and I guess, like there's always, we have our bag of tricks we can fall into. That's why, like, whenever I'm in a store and I'm playing something, I just play my stock motif. And the reason why I do it is because I know what it is and I know what it sounds like. Because when I'm in a store, I'm only there to either try and get something. And I'm so tired of like getting it home. I call it the vintage slap. When you play it in the store, you're like, this is amazing. I bought a 63 Firebird. Me and my dad bought it at a place called Voltage Guitars. And he had a little deluxe. And the deluxe, unbeknownst to me, had a 12AX7 in it, and it had a different rectifier. And so it was like a little baby Marshall. And so I plugged this Firebird into this little deluxe, and I was like, oh my goodness, this thing's amazing. I'm going to make this my thing. Like no one's really rocking the Firebird. And then I got it home, and it sounded so freaking anemic. It was like, I'm like, as I'm out $6,000, and I
needed the amp too. You needed the amp. That's all.
Was the whole key. And then I went back to him. I was like, why does this? And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, everybody wants an amp. Lenny Kravitz wants an amp. I'm like, yeah, no shit, dude.
This is Lloyd, obviously, right?
And I go, you mind if I look at it? He goes, no. And then I realized the second, he probably didn't even know. You know what I mean? I don't think he was trying to do it. I think so. So my point is, if you put a 12AX7 in an old Tweed panel deluxe, it's a beast, And so, my point is that whenever I play anywhere, if I pick up guitar and play in front of anybody, I just go to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 because I know that sound and I know what it does.
Right.
And that's thing. And so to me, it's the art of it. I truly like the art of it. Like, like I get
Yeah.
Jack White, I get the amp, I get, it all makes sense. It's part of his thing. It's,
Yeah.
I think what's happening is as the world moves on and we get older, and things move forward, I think, what I'm going to try and keep alive is the art of what I do. Like I like the fact that I do things a certain way. I like the fact that, like I like the fact that I still write pencil to paper. You know what I mean? Even though everybody sits there on the iBook, I get it's 1,000 times more efficient. I like being able to erase. I like being able to visually see it. That is part of my craft moving forward, and that's kind of also what helps me, because at the end of the day, and at first I worried about it. I'm like, we're getting older and everything's changing. But at the end of the day, either you move the needle or you don't. And that either you have or you don't have. There's nothing that will change that. You know what I mean? And so I think I've been fortunate enough. And it's hard because a career is a combination of being confident in what you do, but also kind of you want to be humble. You don't want to be, it's like we're not curing sickness here. You know what I mean? So my whole career has been a combination of being very like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? That's not, but then also being very confident too. So it's like,
it's a great point. I mean, just to kind of nail down on it, it's like at some point I was always I'm Canadian and I'm very like, kind of, I don't know, whatever you think.
The Canadians, by the way, have the reputation for being the nicest people on the planet. Like everybody, like it's even a running joke. I'm like, Pete's so cool. They're like, he's Canadian. I'm like, oh yeah, you know what I mean? So all you people from Canada, just know that we, as our awful American, gaudish culture, always thinks the Canadian people are just the nicest people on earth. I've never met an unfriendly Canadian ever.
Canadians are cool. It was a nice place to grow up, and it's a simple way of life and all that. It was, but definitely, I had to get a little bit more. Like I hit a point where it was like, where I'm like, oh, I don't know, and then I hit a point where it was like, you're at this age now where you better know, like, like where it's like you better own your shit, like and it's like you say, you move the needle, you don't, and then be confident, like this is my thing, this is the way I do it. I feel like it's a good way to go, even if it's not, like you say, the most efficient or the most like paper, and that's sort of like what I try to bring to my work now, but in a, in a humble way. But it's like, I do feel like confidence is an important, there was a great, I went to a Mix magazine sponsored event with Bob Clearmountain and Chris Lordalgie talking about mixing.
I literally Bob just mixed. Well, I just saw Bob the other day. He's mixing one of the tracks for him. He's phenomenal.
he's a lovely guy. He's like a really good friend of mine. Him and his wife have been so kind to me. Yeah, they're the best. But so I go to this thing, and it was at the Apogee Studio, and it's Chris and Bob, and the mix guy's moderating. He's asking them questions, and he says, the mix guy says, what do you think your top 3 sort of personality traits are that have contributed towards your success? And he's like, you guys, whoever wants to take it first. And Chris goes, or sorry, Bob actually went first. And Bob's like, oh, you got these 2 legends sitting there, right?
Yeah.
And one's Chris, one's Bob. And Chris really looks up to Bob, but Chris has done a lot of mixing he mixed a lot of major #1 hits, right? And it's like, so you got these 2 guys sitting there and they're 2 different approaches, and Bob says, oh, I don't know, maybe it's like I'm kind of easygoing, I think I'm easy to work with, I think I'm, like, and he kind of went down that road, and he was very humble in his answer. And then it got to Chris, and Chris goes, you know what number 3 is? Confidence. You know what number 2 trait is? Confidence. The number 1 trait? Confidence. And it was like the dichotomy, but they were both, it was so, and neither guy was wrong, but it was like, I did take away, I liked that. I mean, I was like, if you, in any situation, if you're feeling like there's a reason why you've arrived there, and it's like you better just be, you better just be confident at some point.
And it's also interesting. It's like I also try, and I think it's also important to stay. It's that combination of like being exceptionally confident, but then also kind of you got to stay humble too. You can't just walk in the room because
open mind.
Yeah, it's a combination of the two. And here's what I realized when I work with a lot of younger people, because I do music for TV and film and all these different. Sometimes you're put in a situation where, like, okay, for this project, you're going to be kind of corralling this herd of kittens here, and you have to wrangle all this talent. And it's really interesting. And I say this in a good way, but like even now with like all the new guitar players, like they've got every detail right for sure, without a doubt, and they missed the big picture. And the whole game is the big picture. Do you know what I mean? So think of it like the best analogy I was trying to give to them. I'm like we're building a wall. If you're slightly out with that first brick, by the time you get to the end of the wall, you're like miles off your target limit here. So sometimes that's where being the you know, having the combination of both kicks in, you know what I mean? And that's where, you know, and so
Yeah.
it
This
brings
is
full circle. And that's like, even now, it's like you have to have a sonic, you know, yeah, like I like Josh Homme because I'm not saying I'm not going to learn a Josh Homme lead per se, but I do like his aesthetic. I like that, you know, he is an, you look at him, you go, that's an artist. Like him, or you can like it or not. That's fine. I don't have
yeah.
people, you know, I would rather have people be like, I get what he does. It's just not for me. I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? Like I said,
Yeah.
even with
Yeah.
gear, I like stuff that's amazing, like in straight, or stuff that's awful. What I don't like is the shit in the middle. I don't even know what to do with that stuff. It's
Right.
like, it's just, you know what I mean? I'm always looking. That's, I think, why my dad's stuff was such a thing. He always had such big sonic footprints. His pedals, his amp. It
Mhm.
was a thing. It's like, you know, playing a 100-watt Marshall Plexi, dude. It can be a rough day at the office. You know what I mean? You have to
Right.
be, whew, you know, you got to be awake for that one. You know,
But
so
when you make it work, it's magic, you know?
yep, yep.
I've got a I highlighted, a comment
Oh,
here, which is, "Did you ever keep a certain Magic Marshall?" I think you kind of, answered that. You sold off a lot of hundreds, but now
yeah.
you're buying
Okay.
them again, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't. So I've got a couple. The best sounding Marshall Plexi is actually a Park 50-watt that Mike Tempesta has. That's the
Oh,
best sounding one.
I know
That was
Mike.
one you were there, right? That, in my opinion, remember, because you were there when we went over to, side note, because, you know, we went over to Dave Friedman's, who's super cool. I recommend everybody get a chance to work with him if you can. And
Yeah,
I had one of my Plexis that my dad had done some stuff to,
yeah,
all versions of stock. When I say stuff, meaning it was just, you know, either a slight, you know, I think we went from a shared cathode to a split cathode or something like that, real basic. And my dad would just do stuff by ear. And then, and I was always, Mike had one that was kind of more closer to like a stock, like, you know,
right.
a stock 59 spec lead. So I was like, oh, I want to swap mine over. And so we went over there and we played it. So and Pete was there. So it was great because we got to have an extra set of ears, because you looked at Pete and Pete's like, wah, or wah, you know, you're like, okay, cool. You know, and so you heard Mike's, but in my opinion, that is the best sounding 50-watt that I've come across. And I don't have one that's that good, but
Yeah,
I've got good ones. I've got real good ones. And honestly, they all kind of all have that sound. I mean, some are just a hair bit more pleasant. And what I've noticed, for those of you that are searching, you can do a lot of changes, but the inherent quality will always be the inherent quality. And I think that comes down to
yeah,
the iron. So, at
yeah,
least for me with Plexis, because they're really, think of a Plexi just kind of like, just think of it like a lawnmower. You can kind of make them all do the same thing. It's not like they're
yeah,
that different. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Some,
the code has been cracked, I think, with
yeah,
guys like
some are
Dave and
just, you know, like
yeah,
even we played Dave's Friedman, like even Dave's personal Plexi. His was very voiced. It was a 50-watt, but in my opinion, it was very much voiced like a Van Halen type thing. It was a little less
yeah,
squawky, a little bit more scooped, which is kind of that Van Halen thing. Whereas mine were kind of more, mine were more squawky. You know what I mean? That was kind of that, because that's always what I thought of on a 50-watt. It was always that real mid-range throw forward, whereas the 100 watts had that tighter bottom end and were a little bit more scooped. And Dave's, I thought, was exceptionally well voiced for that Van Halen thing. You know, plus
yeah,
he runs it down at 90 volts. He's got he's got it locked. You know what I mean, for sure. But
yes.
yeah.
Um, there was somebody here with a comment, super chat, loving the biggest band in the world. And they say, how did you get the GAV-19T to sound so good?
Oh, I just turn it wide open. That's all it is. Just wide open.
Isn't that one of those little, what amp is that? That's
That's
the
a Chandler Limited amp. It was this
right.
guy, Wade Goki, I believe is. I hope I'm not. I've known Wade for quite a long time. Super nice guy, and he originally was over at Brent Averill, and then he went off and started Chandler Limited, which I
Got
believe
it.
his son's name's Chandler. I think that's where the name came from. And he made it. It's real simple. It's very similar. That amp is kind of like what I call like a high fidelity Dominator. You know,
Mm,
it's kind of got like, it's an 18-watt, so it's two EL84s.
sure.
Yeah, and it's got a real, the EQ is, it's not like, it's called a Bixendal or what, Baxendal. I don't know what the EQ is called, but it's
Oh,
a very
Baxton. Yeah.
back. Yeah, yeah. It's
That
not
does
like,
that crazy when
yeah,
you,
exactly. Whereas a Marshall is just basically, a Marshall is really, in all honesty, if you turn everything on open on a Marshall, that's really what it is. The rest is just subtractive.
right.
That's
Yeah,
what a Marshall
exactly.
circuit is, or a basement or whatever it is. Whereas
Yeah.
these were different, and but I do stuff differently than a lot of people. Like, for example, what I'll do is I'll take a pedal, okay, and rather than like most people use a pedal like a wah-wah pedal. They get their whatever their favorite amp is, they put a wah-wah and they start going to town. I go completely the opposite. I will take a pedal and then I will use that as kind of like the sound, and then I just build the amp around it. So for example, when people were using like Octavias, those things can be brutally nasty sounding. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like a Univox Super Fuzz or something like that. They're amazing pedals, but they're inherently have, you know, very crystalline type approaches. So I would just EQ using the actual amp. So I would use, for example, I'd use a Silvertone. Silvertone has no real high end to them. You know what I mean? They're kind of like those, you know, they're just kind of lopped off on the high ends. It's like a Supro. I've got a bunch of Supros. I don't think there's anything above, I don't know, 5Ks, 4K on those amps. Like there's no high end, you know, to speak of. So when you put like a real kind of brittly bright pedal in front of it, oh, it kicks in gear, you know.
That's the Rangemaster combo, really. I mean, right? Like Rangemaster into the going to sound terrible into the input 1 on a 4-hole Marshall, but the normal channel, which is normally kind of woolly and dark, and it kicks ass, right?
Yeah.
It's the combination of things.
It's the combo. I think that's the art. That's the excitement, you know. You know what I mean? So I like mix and match. I like the different sounds that, you know, I use them all very, very differently. So, but I try and find stuff that's very drastic. I don't like, you know, I don't use very middle of the road stuff, which is kind of a lot of people do. You know, I don't care. I don't care if the guitar does one thing or the amp just does one thing that's amazing. I'll use it just for that one thing. That's fine. You know?
Yeah, I hear that 100%. Javier with a super chat there. Thank you, man. He says, just saying what's up and throwing into the Java fund.
That's the kind of buddies you want, friends like that right there.
100%. There's good people here. Here's a way off topic super chat. I'm just going to grab this one here. Got my PT15 IR yesterday, blown away. Fantastic. I'm glad that's my my little 15-watt signature.
Yeah.
Says pairs with a Bogner 112C with 312M 65 cab. Marshall 1936 with greens feels a bit too bright. That's cool. Yeah, 65 can be like a darker. Do you ever use 65-watt Celestians?
Yeah.
Greenbacks?
Yeah, I use them all. They're all different. I actually like 75s. I like them.
Yeah.
I like 25s and 75s. That's kind of where I go. The one everybody's hot on, which I am not a fan of personally, are the vintage 30s. Everybody loves them. I've never
certain amps.
Yeah, certain amps. They're always a bit hard for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, me too. A V30 can be it could be a great thing for a certain thing, you know, but you know, when we look at, they also all over the map. I mean, they sound very like, you know, different over the years, but this fellow's asking like tips for the 1936 and why. So if you've got greenbacks in there and it feels a bit too bright and raspy, I mean, I would say go with either I mean, if you're like a G12M 65 creamback, it's going to sound good in the 65 creamback's basically a higher power greenback, and they've got a slightly more rolled off top end, because generally speaking, when you take a greenback and you go to more robust, you try and up the power handling them, they get darker. So just go with the 65 if you like it in a 112. And in addition to that, maybe even try, if you really want to go for a nice smooth speaker, the A-type, Celestion A-type has a really nice rolled off kind of top end.
Have you ever tried the Governor by Eminence?
Governor is supposed to be kind of V30, but their take and maybe nicer for you. Do you think?
I don't know what everybody is. To me, they sound like a 20. So just so you know, like I think of a 25 as kind of like they're mid-range heavy. I mean, they're definitely, they're kind of a full mid-range. There's not a ton of high end on them, I don't think. At least, you know, I mean, not like an EV or something like that. That's you know. Whereas I thought the Governor is almost like a super extended version of that. Like it's like almost more rolled off high end. It's kind of squawky. I like it. If you want like an Uber 25, that's kind of it's worth checking out. You know,
the Governor, yeah, interesting. Did you ever try the like the Warehouse Veteran 30?
No,
that was like
tried a lot of speed.
It's a V30, but friendlier.
Got
it. They tried to take that 2K sort of spike thing that if you don't like
it's that upper wisp. But I will say this: it's that vintage 30s do sound really good for that low detune stuff, though, boy. Woo!
And with the right amp, you know, a darker modern, it's a sound. I mean, you know, like Dave Friedman always says, you know, the basically most rock V30s or greenbacks. That's what we've heard for the last however, and a little bit of, you know, G12H30 mixed in. That's most rock, you know. That's been.
I thought the 75s were the jam. I always liked them. Wasn't that what they did?
I've heard them sound good, and you know, interesting aside, like Eddie Van Halen when he did.
Is that Fair Warning 75s?
Well, it could be. I heard that. I was going to say when he used the Soldano for the first time on the FUCK or FCU, because how would you spell it? Fuck, the word fuck. That record in 91 or 2, whenever they recorded that, he got his first Soldano then. So that amp was used, I think, on that record quite a bit. And the cabinet that I don't know, I think it was like either an Andy Brower thing or maybe it was a Soldano thing, but he ended up using a 75 because that was like the Soldano cabinet that he tried, I think.
Yeah.
And he liked it.
Yeah.
I got to get the exact story from Friedman. But anyways, he liked those speakers with the SLO. And so that that speaker used a lot of that. I know it's Yngwie's favorite too.
Really?
75s. Yeah, he likes 75s. So.
I'm a Maestro fan. Like I said, I feel like, he really has it. Whatever it is, like I've heard a lot of those guys do it, and I don't know. I've always been a fan. Maybe it's when I was younger too. Like when that Rising Force came out, we were like, oh.
Dude, he's a one of a kind. He's a legend. It's
Dude,
like you want
Alcatraz. Have you seen that live Alcatraz? I used to work in a music store and they played it, and I remember I was sitting there like polishing guitars, and part of me was just sitting there like, what is even happening here? Like it was just we'd never seen anything like it, and he was just
Yeah, I remember when it happened. I mean, it was like I seriously remember reading. You probably remember this too, like Guitar Player magazine, and reading the Mike Varney column.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing Paul Gilbert there the first time. I remember seeing Jennifer Batten there. I
Tony
remember seeing
Tony.
I remember them all. They're I can still, for some reason, I can remember their photos in that column.
I could never get in that thing, dude. He would never put me in. I saw him years later. He's like, I should have put you in. I'm like, dude, never. I can't even tell you. Like, I would send it out, and I would like wait. I'd be sitting on the curb by like the Wawa, which is our 7-Eleven, and they'd bring the magazine. I get the first one. I'd be like, oh.
Yeah. I ended up on your competitor label, bro, with Guitar for the Practical Musician, because you never would. But I remember those, and I remember Yngwie. I remember seeing Yngwie for the first
He's
time.
got it. I think I don't know. I find him totally hilarious too. Like I just think I don't know, just something about that. I'm totally entertained by the Maestro. I haven't met him yet though, so I don't know. We'll see. But couldn't he use he just used like metal faces like those early 70s and just
71, 72. He liked the game. I think he's a bright cap guy. He likes the because he was always like the ones with more gain. Well, we know what happened then. They had the big bright cap.
I'll give him a pass. He's that good.
Well, the interesting thing was a combination. Watch if you haven't seen it, the Rick Beato interview with him. It's really good, and he says a lot of really interesting things that resonated with me. Like, for example, he's talking about old Plexis and 4-hole Marshalls, and he says the gain in those amplifiers was linear throughout the amplifier. That's the best description of an old Ford.
That's exactly what it is.
And the factor that I was talking about earlier, where like not too much preamp gain. It was like the preamp moving into the power amp into the phase inverter is a big part of the sound. The whole amp making the tone. You got to turn it way up, and then it does its thing, and it's linear all the way through, and you keep your tone. Well, the combination of that with HS3s, his pickups, which are kind of like sort of darker low output for what they are. The stacked.
I haven't heard HS3s. I've got a set of the Maestro's pickups. They're different.
Is that the Duncan?
Duncans. I got Duncan. They're really good. I like those, but I don't know. His sound was, it was such a thing. But yeah, people always ask me on that.
Yeah, like the 250 preamp, the 50-watt Marshall that was the kind of probably with the bright cap, but the darker pickups, like the combination was the Yngwie thing to me. And then 75s, big dust cap speakers. There was, and his sound was really cool. I mean, I remember the Trilogy album, and I remember the Rising Force album.
It was kind of like a hollow violin-y type thing, It was like there was a hollowness to it in a good way. Like it didn't have that. It wasn't, it was a Strat, but I don't know. Yeah, people always ask me Marshalls. I tend to favor. So for me, I mean, here's what I'm looking for. I'm always a Plexi guy, but not the earlier stuff. I even had one of the first 50 Marshalls. It was great. I had a split face 63, and basically they were just Fenders. They were just big tubby Fenders. I didn't care for them as much. I'm not even a JTM 45 guy, to be honest with you. They sound great. They're fun to play. I just can't. They never translate to any kind of music that I'm doing, I guess is what it comes down to. They're fun. They are fun to play. Don't get me wrong. They're a little tubby, a little soupy, but they're fun. Yeah. I've just never been able, every time I've had one for a couple of years, and every time I've tried to use it, it never made the cut. So then I was like, blah. And then, so for me, it's the last year of the Plexi is always the best one with the rectifier, not the tube rectifier one. I like the rectifier,
but you pull the bright cap. and then there's your sound.
Instantly, and it's always that last year one, and I don't even mind. I like the early metal faces too, because it's really kind of the same amp. To be honest with you, I like those. Always have some punch to them, but I don't go past like 72, 73. It's, to me, it's the iron. I'm basically buying the iron. That's the deal. Because, and then the crazy part is you have to realize too, from people out there, that like the whole vintage versus new. Here's the deal. Back in the day, it was a thing. It was a movement. And then the second the internet kicked in, it became about the money. And then the whole game changed, because it was no longer about being utilitarian. It was about money. You know what I mean? So like we would take strats and pull necks off one and stick them. We didn't give a shit. It was like, okay, this works. I love the neck on this one. I love the sound of this one. It was just a spoon. You were just bending the spoon to do what you needed to do. And then the second the money kicked in, it went out the window. Then it became this and that, and it all became a money game. And all the marshals that were messed with got. And then you also have to realize that they were. They kind of varied back in the day, and then through the last 30 years they've been modded. So you're kind of getting like this unknown mystery soup.
Yeah.
Of what, you know. So it's the vintage world it's just different than it once was. Back in the thing, it was kind of like pure. It was uncut.
It was used guitars and amps. That's all it was.
Yeah, that's all it was, you know. And then you made it work, and then it'd be like, now it's like, you know, I'm afraid to, you know, here I got here's a vintage Les Paul. Woo woo. You know, I'm afraid. I hope the volume pot doesn't seize. You know?
Wait a second. Show us that again.
Oh, yeah.
Don't just pull that out and then that's a all gold 1955 Les Paul.
One of the best necks, super light, doesn't weigh much.
Wait. Where did you get that? When did you get that?
Well,
long time ago, or is that recent purchase?
No, it's been a while. I've had it
because the neck stripped, and I found one recently. I was like, "Wait, did you get that guitar?"
No. My dad stripped it. It's actually, I think it got pulled out of a Guitar Center somewhere.
Okay,
you know?
All gold, just like that guitar.
You have to, because the necks with alligator on those. That's why you probably see them stripped. You know. And
and
it's great. It's great for doing what it does, but it, doesn't stay in tune. You know what I mean? It buzzes, it rattles. Like, this is it. You want to play the, this is what you get. It's like, look at the action. It's like, that you could stick a Snickers bar into that thing. You know what I mean? Like, so so my point is to people is it's never, it's just what you do with it. Then Josh Homme shows up with a PV Deuce and you're like, okay, let's rock. You know what I mean? And then so as fun as all this is, you just have to put it in perspective. Is it worth, even now, like I've been chasing this one burst forever because I grew up with it. You know what I mean? And but now I'm over it. Now I'm like, at this, to be honest with you, for not that it's not even available to me because I've tried and it's just, it's just, but even at those numbers, it's like, I could help so many. I could save dogs with that. I could, there's things I could do that honestly at this point in my life would be so much more exciting than that. Even though I do appreciate it, you know what I mean? I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze for me.
Yeah, dude, I feel that 100%. I mean, when it comes to it, it's like a, I've got my couple old guitars. Here's my old Strat,
Well, I've played that one. So that's a good sounding one. What's that, 64, 65?
Yeah, late 64, November 64. So solidly pre-CBS. The logo in the weird place because it's a transitional, But
you got lucky with that one because it sounds good. And a lot of the Strats will have like a great neck position. You're like, what am I going to do with a great neck position? And I'm the same guy that just said I would keep one amp if it did one thing, but it's tough to have a Strat that's got a great fourth position. You're like,
and that's it. Yeah, this guitar actually has a lot of it's really cool. My favorite thing on this guitar is actually the bridge, but the bridge position.
It's funny. I've got a 63 that I got from Norm. It's got a monster bridge, but it's weird. And do you find yourself doing this? And I realize how bougie this sounds. I get it. Because most people are, lucky if you can afford one guitar. I get that. None of that is ever lost on me. So don't think it is. But as we've just worked and then, it becomes you buy stuff. And also for me, it's just part of my work tools. It's so you can write this off. And it becomes more of there's a lot more to it than just, hey, I'm on Instagram looking at it, So let me preface it as a guy that's sitting here with sunglasses inside. I get it. I get the bouginess. My point is what I found a lot of stuff, here's the downside to this. The more experience you have with it, you realize what things are and what they're not. So for example, I have a lot of gear that's just placeholders. Like I got a great 63 Strat, big. I mean, this neck, I don't think I've ever seen a neck this big on a Strat. It is a Ray Vaughan to the Hills special. but it's just a placeholder for me. I just keep it because it, okay, but I would gladly trade it for one that's better suited for me. You know what I mean? And so I find
They
that
can, yeah, they can be all over the map. What about James Santiago's? That one, remember that one
the
that
white one, I was there when he got it.
What the hell with that guitar?
Okay, so that he called me. So there's James. First of all, James is like the coolest guy. But James calls me and says, "Hey, listen, I just talked to Norm. He knows I'm always looking for the big neck strats. You know what I mean? Because I mean, look at the size of my hand. They're just I got fucking banana grabbers here. You know what I mean? They're just big hands. So
made for playing guitar.
Well, I will say, but so what I tend to shy away from is I don't like when necks get small. Believe it or not, this way, of course, but even this way. So because they just get small, my hands jam up. So because all my sound is just, it just sits there like that. So I'm always like thumb over the top, that's always kind of the approach with it. So when I get the small from it, I wrestle with them a little bit. So he always knows I'm looking for big ones. So he calls me and says, "Hey, Norm just got one. There's a white 63, and 63 typically had kind of like an even neck. And they were kind of, some of them were Charvelli a little bit. They were kind of wider and a little like, not flat on the back, but you could tell that that's kind of where the Charvel originally came from, because my original Charvel had a wider, kind of flatter neck. But I had a 63 Strat, which I sold because we needed the money. I was so bummed out. I sold it to this guy, Elliot Rubinson, over at Rumble Seat. How was it? Rumble Seat? No, it wasn't Rumble Seat. It was, what was the one in Florida? I mean, I'm really forgetting stuff these days. It was the chain there. Elliot was a super nice. He eventually took over Dean. I forget what the place. Thoroughbred.
I remember Thoroughbred.
He was so nice to me. That guy. I went and he knew I liked vintage guitar. I went in his office and he had guitars stacked up to the ceilings, like all the old cases. And there was a Blackguard that he sold me for like literally like even below the going rate, because he knew I wanted it. He was just cool, like really nice guy. Really, it's so cool. And so I had a relationship with him. And then my parents moved out to California, and we had clearly miscalculated what the cost of California was. And so we needed the money. And I still live in Connecticut. And so I sold this 63 Strat back. I sold it to Elliot, and I think I sold it for like $3,300, like at the time, which was like, he just did it as a favor to buy it off me, because I was just, and then it sold. He ended up selling it to John Butcher, and I ran into John Butcher. And at that point, this was a couple years later, I was making money now. So I was like, I had enough. I said, John, super nice guy. I said, John, do me a favor. You got that Strat? He goes, yeah, I got that Strat. He goes, that thing's amazing. I had it refretted with like 6105s on it. Like it had the perfect neck. Like it was like, like it wasn't too big, wasn't too small, and it didn't get small at the headstock. It felt kind of unilateral, like, know. And I said, John, listen, I sold the guitar. I never should have. My bad. I said, if you ever sell it, I said, just here's my number. I will give you whatever market value is. No questions asked. It'll be the easiest sale of your life. He's like, yeah, man, no problem. And I didn't hear from him for like 5. And I ran to him 10 years later. I said, John, how are you doing? We're talking. Super nice guy. And I said, do you still have a Strat? He goes, no, I sold that. I'm like, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Listen, that was mine. I sold it. He was by no means obligated. But I said, he goes, yeah, I kind of forgot about that, But anyways, perfect. The reason why I liked them was it had they just kind of feel the same, like an old broadcaster. I don't like the big, goofy, stupid, big necks. They actually tire my hands out. I like the ones that kind of feel like they're just kind of like you don't really feel the taper a ton. You know what I mean? So anyway, Santiago calls me, goes, they got a 63 Strat, it's got a big neck. I'm like, let's go. We hop in the car, we go down there. And I looked at it, and it didn't have the big neck. It didn't have the neck that I was used to. And then the second he played it, because originally I was like, I was going to buy it because you just can't get them. So I was like, fuck it, I'll just buy it, And the second he played it, and I said, and that's James' guitar. Like the second he played it, I knew instantly. I was like, dude, that's your guitar. And he was like, are you sure? And he was so cool about it. He knew the guitar was perfect for him. He's like, and he's such a gentleman. He was like, dude, but the guitar is you should get it. We got it. It's kind of like, you should be dating her. I'm like, no, dude, it was done. That's how, that was one of those moments in time. There was 2 moments in time. That was, that guitar belonged with him. And then 2, my friend Mike Tempesto played this little Scout. It was like a Watkins Scout. We played it at one of the vintage shops, and he sounded so good on it. I'm like, dude, either you're buying it or I'm buying it, and you're going to end up with it. And it was just, because every now and then you just a combo. It has to be there. That's where that guitar needed to be. But I think his is a mahogany body. Do I understand?
Oh correctly? Yeah, it's mahogany. It's weird. That's right.
So fat.
Yeah, it's an odd, yeah, and oh, the guitar sounded like that day when we were playing. I was like, that
Yep.
is an amazing sounding Strat. It
Yep,
had so much
amazing sounding
character.
stuff. But it was his. The second when he played it, it was magical. When I played it,
Yeah.
it was just like it sounded like me playing a really good guitar.
Well,
But
you
he played
sounded
it,
great playing it that day at his place. It
yeah,
sounded
he's got it down, you know. But yeah,
that's
but so
especially
yeah, but that's what I like about this. The part of this lifestyle is also these crazy stories. Like I got to give you my John Suhr story before I leave.
yes. So I just lit it up there because we should go soon.
Yeah, yeah.
This fellow was asking what was.
Okay,
Sorry,
so
you guys. I feel like I neglected a bit of the. But we've just had. You know how it gets. We get
yeah,
talking.
because I just won't shut up, and that's the other problem. So it's
Well,
like it's tough, dude.
no,
You
me
listen.
neither.
You invited me on. It's on you, dude. You know. And,
But yeah, tell us the Sir, please.
and the
Tell us
thing
the
is,
Sir
you're
story.
such a nice guy. You won't even be like, and let's move on. You're just like, let the guy talk. So that's once again, it's that Canadian thing, man. I don't know, dude.
I love where it goes. You know, I
You
like
gotta hang out with us more. You'll just become totally, you know, rude. Just hang out with us for a little bit. You'll find. So here's my John Suhr story. With my dad, I had the Jackson. I hopped in. He's like, no, we're gonna get you a guitar. This is gonna help your career. This is how much we were trying. Even though we go into New York City and we go up and down the streets, and everybody was just really not nice to us. Like they were just, I don't play. They wouldn't let me play. They were just like, because I was a kid. I was, you know,
48th Street, right?
48th Street. It was New York. That place is not for the faint of heart. And they were just not, they were rude. They didn't want me to be there. Like, and then we get to this place called Rudy's. Rudy was really nice and he was cool. And he liked the way I played. You can tell when people like the way you play. Like I'm playing guitar. I didn't want to be rude. He goes over and he turns it up. Like, you know what I mean? There's no one there.
Right.
It's just me, him, and my dad. Like you know what I mean? It was, you know, and then people were shuffling in and out. He liked it. And I was like, oh man, I felt like, okay, cool. And he was really nice, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking to my dad's like, yeah, you know, we were trying to get my, you know, kid a guitar. And he's like, hey, you know, he goes, there's a guy upstairs that's building guitars for us. And this was when they had this 3-level place. It was very small. It was the original Rudy's at 48th. So when I would go up this twisty turn thing, and then he introduced me to John Suhr, who had a place in the top. And this was right when they, I think, Mark Knopfler was kind of like just when he had those things. And he shows me the guitars and they looked amazing. And I was like, oh man, these things were like cool. And then this is where they got me. They go, yeah, we're building one for Steve Stevens. And I was like, oh damn, you know what I mean? So then my dad pulls me aside and he goes, you know, and I didn't even think like we should have one. I should get one made. I just, in my mind, I'm like, these things are going to be like untouchable. This is like what they make for like real rock stars and shit, you know? And I just didn't, you know, and my dad's like, well, listen, if the guy, we should have him build you one. And I don't know what it was, but at that moment in time, it just made sense. I was like, heck yeah. So, and they were priced. It was a lot. It was everything to us. I had to sell the jack. I had to sell everything I had to get that guitar. But in all honesty, it wasn't that much more than what guitars were going for. It wasn't like it was on another planet. It was just on the higher end of things. And my dad really wanted me to have it. So now I'm upstairs talking to John, and Rudy wasn't even trying to sell. He was just like, hey, you should check them out. And I checked them out and they were great. The fretwork, I remember, was pitch perfect on those things. I mean, really. And I talked to John. He was like the nicest guy. And so at this point, and I didn't really know that much about guitars. So he had a guitar there, which he tells me he knows where he still is. He opened up this gig bag and there was a guitar. It was a soloist shaped body, which is what a lot of the early Pensa Suhrs were. They were like, I think Tom Anderson spin-offs or versions of, or maybe even parts. I don't know. I don't know whether he was making them then or was just assembling them. I don't remember. Like this was
a little bit of both going on in the early days, where it started with like the parts were coming from Schecter, I think, and then being assembled, and then Tom was at Schecter, Tom Anderson. That's where that came from. But then eventually, then they started doing their own. You know, so it could have been from either period. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know which one, but I mean, at the time they really stood out, and he was really nice. So he opens up this, and it had the guitar, but it didn't have a neck on it. And I said, and I remember I had a camera, and I took a picture of it. And I still have that picture to this day. And it was this amazing, like orange creamsicle burst. It looked like a creamsicle popsicle. It was orange. And I just remember thinking, dang, that is amazing. And it had 3 single coils, but they were hot rails and had a little cool switch. And I thought that thing was the coolest looking guitar I'd ever seen. So he basically says, hey, so I said, let's build. So he built me a guitar. It took like, I think 6 or 7 months, which for a kid was eternity, you know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I told him what I wanted, and I wanted the neck off the Jackson. And so I think I came back a second time and I brought my Jackson. He calipered it all out. And then I remember this, I'll never forget this. But at the time, this is when EMGs were the shit, you know what I mean? So my dad's like, you got to try something new, man. You got to change it up. Let's throw caution to the wind here. And so I ended up going with 3 single coil EMGs, right? and it had a little switch. It was like a boost switch, and he did it perfectly. And then I wanted it the orange thing, but I wanted the whole guitar done orange. And I remember this. I specifically remember this. John's like, okay, and he says we should do this in Nitro, and I said, no, can't do Nitro. It's got to be. What do you call it?
Poly or
not poly? Sorry, no, sorry. I take it back. He wanted to do it in poly. I wanted it in Nitro because I was like,
you wanted it in Nitro.
So it was completely reverse. He says, hey, I get it. You like the vintage guitars, and he says, but this particular one, he goes, I'm telling you, these colors, I can't. I don't know what's going to happen with these colors. They're, they could definitely. I said, I don't want to hear that, man. We are going Nitro, and he's like, you're sure? And I said, and I remember I was proud of myself. I was like, absolutely, I'm going Nitro. So he does the whole guitar. I come back 7 months later. It was done. I mean, there wasn't a stitch out of place with this thing. It was done perfectly. And it had EMGs. And I remember being so happy. I get the fret job. I don't think I've ever seen a fret job to this day. I mean, it was perfectly. I get it home and it's got EMGs, and those things sound like they're the cleanest sounding pickups. I'm plugging it to my rig and I'm like, what is going on here? And I was just like, oh, I think I made the wrong call on this one, because it was completely my idea,
Right.
And then I'll never forget this. And then about maybe, I don't know, maybe about 5 weeks in, I'm like looking at the guitar and it's kind of like, looks like it's different. And I'm like, maybe it's just me. And then I wait, and then about a week later, and I kid you not, I played an outdoor show with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I kid you not. And I look at the guitar one day and it starts turning brown. Like, it's like this poop brown,
There's a Nitro in the sun.
And at first I'm just like, what is going on? And then every day, and finally it just got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I was just like, like it was, I should have listened to him. He knew, and I just went against the grain, and it just bit me. So that's the story of the poop grain, of the poopsicle, I call it now. So, and then eventually I just couldn't take it. I had to trade. I traded it for a Park Plexi, believe it or not.
Dude, you don't know how many times I go to John and I'm like, I've got an idea. This is what I want to do. And he's like, no, it's not going to work. And I'm like, what do you mean? They get mad, And it's like, oh, can I like for example, like reverse headstocks? I'm always like, I want a reverse headstock. You won't.
You won't like it. Well, he's going to buzz.
Yeah, and he always talks me out of stuff all the time. But he's right. He's generally.
Well, I'll tell you this. I can only speak to my experience. He was right on that one. You know what I mean? So the story. I don't even know if he thought it was funny. I don't know. I thought if he's probably just like, you're an idiot, dude. I don't know. You know what I mean? But really nice.
He's really Mr. Nice Reality Check. You know what's funny, man? I mean, I love PAFs. I love PAFs. Love it. But his pickup that was in his, because so like a JB or something like that, we know what they do. And I'm always like, no, I'm a PAF guy, because you paint yourself into a corner otherwise, by putting a hot pickup in the guitar. They have no sparkle. They're always a mid-range bomb, great in front of dirt. But so I'm out at Suhr one day and I'm playing, doing something upstairs in their kind of video shooting room there, and they got a bunch of guitars up there, and I'm playing my guitar, and it sounds great. And I go, what's that? Oh, that's John's signature guitar, because he has a signature model.
Okay.
Known like, here's my idea of my signature guitar. It's a limba body, and it's kind of different. It's cool. And I'm like, limba, what's that? I pick it up. It's super resonant. It sounds really good. I'm like, what's this? Maybe my guitar should be limba, And then I plug it in, and I've been playing my guitar. And anyway, it had this pickup in it that's now in this one, which is an HSS Plus, which is his version of a JB. Basically, it's about he's like, I just kind of wanted that thing, but I wanted to make it sound a little more like what I think it should sound.
Got it.
So he did it, and I plug in this guitar limba body with this super hot pickup in it.
Crushes, right?
Awesome. I plug it in, and I'm like, God damn.
I know. It's like, why didn't anyone tell me this stuff? Like the best sounding Ernie. My main recording guitar is a Koa Ernie Ball Axis with a Floyd on it.
I know that.
You know what I'm saying? Like I just. And I was joking. I'm like, who buys these things? Lawyers? Because it's so flamed. It's got so much bling.
Yeah.
But here, you got to see it. I mean, look. Let me show you the amount of bling on this thing. Hold on. So I'll grab it. Oh.
Yeah, this guitar is really cool that Blues is going to get right now.
That's right. You were there. But I mean, look at this thing, dude. It is a bling machine, dude. It's got so much going on. I mean, it's just like
crazy flame top.
Dots on the neck. It's so blasted out,
Oh, look at that. Flamey. Yeah. That's wild.
Although I will say yours, the one you had, you had an original Ed one, right?
Which one?
Your
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll grab that. But so this Anyway, it still does that hot pickup thing. You're not
Yeah.
going to get a sparkly, clean sound. It's not going to be vintagey, but in the gain, this pickup is really fun.
Yeah.
So John's always teaching me things.
Have you? I got to say, you know what I was really impressed with was his the SL68 or this whatever his like master volume Plexi sounded great.
Oh yeah, right here. SL. There's the very first one.
That one sounds great. That
number one, serial number one.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, there you go.
It's a great Marshall, you know. That does all the stuff. But yeah, here was my Ed guitar that you played that day.
Yeah, yours actually is. Yours has got that nice. Yours, I would have to say, yours has got almost like a dirtier mids to it. Mine felt kind of. Mine feels. I like mine because it's different, but it's kind of hi-fi sounding. Like it's almost like, you know. I kind of like it because it's got a lot of great, unique. It's almost like, you know, when you play like Flying V's, those old Carina Flying V's, they all sound great. There's a different thing going on. That's kind of what this thing feels like. Whereas yours kind of felt, yours is nice and aggressive. I try and search it. I thought that particular one was an exceptionally good sounding one. You know, at least it sounded like when we fired it up.
This guitar does sound great. Wow, it's got a great. I just looked at. I played it right now. And it's like super out of tune, and the neck has moved a lot on it since the last time I looked at it. So time for a truss rod adjustment.
Yeah, it's funny. Mine never. I literally tune them.
Yeah,
put strings on it. Never. I've literally just came back from the UK. Threw it in the box, we were at Abbey Road Track and I just pulled it out. I think I maybe tuned the G string like 5 cents. Like it was.
That's wild. Yeah. Well, super. And that's roasting. I think the roasting thing is just, you know, it's incredible what it's done for the neck stability, especially on a flamey neck like that. Like Suhr will not do a flame or bird's eye neck unless it's roasted because it stabilizes. Yeah. They won't make one that's not roasted. They'll do it if it's roasted because that's how much it stabilizes the neck.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't. It's funny. They sound different. They sound like everybody's hot on like the steel, stainless steel frets. All that stuff feels. It just. I don't know why. It just feels like. It just brings out more high end. I think is what it feels like to me. You know what I mean?
Stainless steel and stuff. So yeah, how do you feel about that? Like steel compared to.
You know, here's the deal. Without having done a side by side, it's kind of tough. I just like what I'm used to playing, so I always go for the nickel. Like I don't wear. You know, I rotate so many guitars. It doesn't really. I've never really worn one out, and if I did, just refret it. It's not the end of the world. So yeah, I don't. I get nervous on this stuff. I know it's the thing, and everybody loves it. I just you know, I don't know. I like the old school stuff. It's just I'm just used to it. You know what I mean?
No, that's okay. I mean, a lot of guitar players feel that way about. I mean, I know that's at Scott Henderson and Mike Landau and a lot of no nickel. You know, they just want to go
nickel for me all day long. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, I just had this one refretted because when I first got it, I had just really small frets on it. I just want them slightly bigger. So I was like, please put just old school nickel frets on it. That's what I like. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's knowing what you like and not wanting to mess around is fine. You know, I feel like it's like, you know, if it's like, no, I don't need to experiment on. I mean, I sort of, you know how you've got a Floyd Rose on the on that axis. I sort of feel like I did so much like searching in the 90s and like getting comfortable on Gibsons, which I was never comfortable on. And so I finally could play a Les Paul in the 90s. I got used to that because I grew up on Floyd's like you. I mean, I grew up.
I'm not. Yeah, I struggle on I struggle on Les Pauls too.
Yeah,
so on SGs. Jesus, those are tough.
Yeah, the tuning and all that stuff. But I learned how to play them. And so I'm glad I went through all that because I learned how to play them. But the reality is then at some point I realized fucking tuning like every like halfway through the song all the time. Like it's like, you know, I'm always checking my tuning and it's like, didn't I have this figured out in like 1987? Like that Jackson stayed in tune for like 2 weeks.
Totally. Yeah, you can literally drop them off trucks. They were insane, you know. And then here's another thing too, which is just to throw a wrench in everybody's soup. Like think of it like this guitar, and I say this all the time. I'm waiting for this. We're gonna have to make this thing, but guitars are truly like people. You're gonna meet so many in your lifetime, but you're really not gonna bond with a ton of them. You know?
Oh, that's a great analogy. I love that analogy.
Isn't it kind of a case though? Like, and it's like I've had guitars that should sound this way. They don't. I've had maple necks that sounded darker than rosewood necks. Like, there's really kind of no real rules. I've had
you met people that they thought should act a certain way, and like you thought you would like, but then they don't. You don't.
Yeah, like on paper, like you know, like there'll be someone like on paper we should be besties, and then you meet them in your room, and you're just like, there's nothing there. And it's like I can even tell you from having 2 companies that did my own model guitar where I literally at one point, I remember I had to go down to like Yamaha and they want, you know, you always sign the first, whatever, you sign the first batch of 20, whatever. That's always a big thing, you know? And so I went there and I can tell you this, like roughly out of 10 guitars, let's just take 10 guitars. It was kind of like people, like out of 10 guitars, you'd have 2 that were horrible, you know, and then 2 that were amazing. And then the rest were kind of like, okay, you know what I mean? Like they all just sat in the middle. And so it's kind of like that with guitars. Every now and then you just find one and it works and it shouldn't work. It's almost like when you're like, you know, we always rescue our dogs because like, you know, I don't know, we just, once you know, you kind of know. And so like every time I'd go to the pound looking for like, I want a huge bull mastiff with green eyes. And then you walk out with the Chihuahua and it's the coolest dog ever. You know what I mean? So, you know, and I can tell you this, I can tell you which guitars will always sound the best. The ones that are the ugliest, heaviest, can't play them for shit. That's going to be the best sounding guitar of the whole batch, guaranteed. So now I don't even bother. I just find the ugliest guitar in the store. That's going to be mine. You know, it's the truth, man. You know, it's always the way. You know,
don't overthink it, right?
Yeah, just make it work. It's not that complicated, but it's fun. This is maybe part of why we do what we do. All the stuff is a lot of fun to do. You know.
Yeah, it's still a fun journey, and it's like the surprises and stuff, and you never know. I mean, we've gone. I said I was going to check in with you at an hour, and we've gone 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah, I feel bad. I feel at this point it's like we got to let them off the hook, you know. Well, listen, here's what I can say. I really appreciate taking the time, and anybody that hasn't met Pete, as I've met Pete, just walk up to him. He's Canadian, dude. You'll get along with him. I'll leave it at this. Here's what I'll say. This will sum it up perfectly. Let me tell you the story of how I really got to meet Pete, and then we'll leave it at that. So I've been out here forever, kept running in the same circles as you, Pete, because, you know, you're always either session-wise, studio-wise, artist-wise. The names always came up. Just never really, it was like you and Lyle Workman were the 2 guys that I never really quite, I would always be like one day, you know, I don't know why. Then I met Lyle, sweetheart of a dude, nicest guy. You're like, why the fuck, you know? But anyways, I remember when I first met you, I had some questions about, it was like, remember the load boxes? And I was like, which one's the better one? And you were like, dude, you just invited me to the studio. Let me come in. I think you spent like an hour and a half showing me how the sauce was made. Cool as shit. Didn't ask for it. Like, no problem. Like literally just stopped the traffic and showed me everything. I thought that was really nice because a lot of people wouldn't do. A lot of people were always very protective. You were like, no, dude, this is it. Try this, try that, plugged it in. So my point is, I think that comes through a lot. And anyone that hasn't met Pete should just literally go up and say hi because you're just kind of that dude. You know what I mean? Whereas I always thought that was, I still tell people that story. I'm like, yeah, he just, you know, invited me in, let me here, trade this guitar, check that guitar. And, you know, and you were right.
I guess I knew that I'm still the same as I was when I was 14. And I guess I think we're probably kindred spirit kind of thing because from everything you've told me today, as well as things I already knew, you know, kind of about you, I always saw you as, you know, just searching for cool tones and try, you know, the dirty boy amps and you know, and the way you approach things and stuff. It's like, I don't know any different because this is the only thing I've ever really thought about and been passionate about. And it's not about money or about notoriety or about, it's just like what hooked me when I was 10.
Yeah.
And, you know,
it moved the needle. It's just, it always comes down to just either it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, you know, so I think that's cool. And I think you will, because I hope you stay true to that because I think it resonates. And maybe that's why you've been, you know, especially with like the YouTube stuff. I think there is just, I think authentic's authentic and it always reads well. And so for better, for worse, I mean, maybe that's why, because really you've really climbed to the top of that mountain. I mean, you're pretty much, it's kind of like you, Rick Beato, Tim Pierce. I mean, that's kind of that's you guys are like the trifecta of that world. And I guess it's just maybe the authenticity that rings true. You know what I mean? Like, how can you not look at Tim when he's just smiling, playing guitar? You're like, dang, you know?
Yeah. Tim is magic.
It's what you get with him. He's been that way since every time I've ever met him. It's just,
he's just such a wonderful guy. And I really appreciate Rick as well. And I haven't
met Rick. Weasel's met Rick. I haven't met him, but I think he asks, I like the questions he asks. And I think he comes off like, when he's a true fan for all the right reasons. Like, you know, I like that he thinks to ask questions that like, oh, I would ask that, you know what I mean? But I haven't met him. It seems like a really nice guy.
He's wonderful and he's really knowledgeable. And if you ever, you know, got a chance to like interview or anything like, or sit down with him, you'll be within 2 minutes, you'll be like, wow, like this guy really knows. His knowledge is really deep and he does his homework and he's got a real, like, I mean, when the first time I met him, we did an interview in Germany where he interviewed me about playing with Chris Cornell and talking to me about, so what was it like learning all those parts, like Soundgarden, guitar parts, Audio Slave. His depth of knowledge of the tunings, for example, of Soundgarden was like, so when you use this tuning on this song, it was like he knew. Within 2 minutes, I was like, wow, like you really know. Like it took me a long time to absorb all this information about that, and you've got it all. Like and it's not coming from a perspective of like, oh, I'm smart and no. It's like coming from perspective of like he's just a fan and really like he appreciates Soundgarden as much as he does, I don't know, like Pat Metheny or something probably.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's got a depth, and from punk rock to like jazz to he's all over the map with his knowledge, and he just loves music.
Yeah,
I feel, and that's why what makes this song great. You mentioned authenticity in YouTube. That's why that resonated so much with people. Because first of all, with an idea like what makes this song great, you don't have to be a musician. Even you could be a bass player, guitar player, whatever. Yeah. But you could also just be a music listener, somebody that appreciates trying to learn, and his enthusiasm and depth of knowledge about songs and the way he breaks them down and what makes them cool. Oh, the bass stays on the root here, but then goes to the third right before the chorus. And then when it kicks into the chorus, this is what happens. And he's educating you in such a way that's like, it's people give him crap, sometimes. I guess they say that
it's the internet. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, really,
and the bigger you get, the more crap.
Like I said, you got people doing and creating, and then you got people talking and not creating. So
right.
That's what I mean? So side note. So when you worked with Cornell, was that on the same record that Alan and Natasha produced? That one there?
No, so that would be the Euphoria Morning album. So that was around 99, 2000 when they made that. But I worked with him around the Carry On period, and then the next record as well. So I didn't make Carry On with him. That was actually I'm forgetting the name of the guitar player, really good sort of punk rock guitar player from Pennsylvania, and then Brian Ray also played on that record and the guitar. And then I hooked up with him for the tour right after that. And then I worked a bit on the next record with him as well. But I was in his touring band from 2007 through 2010.
Wow.
We did a lot
you got to hear that voice, dude, right? But
we did over 300 shows, and it was the most magic part of I'll never forget it. And he was a lovely guy and was a really good friend. It was some of the best musical moments of my life, for sure.
Yeah. Well, once again, it's about being authentic. Once again, you're looking at somebody that in my opinion, like when I remember first hearing Soundgarden, I remember thinking, yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? Like they twisted it, they did everything they want, and it was so them. Like they
were some of the parts, and everybody got to shine.
Guitar playing was great. Everything was great about that. There's not a weak link on the team. You know what I mean? It was really like, the drums are just bombastic, but it's not even the execution. It's the parts, the way they came up. And those guys were like,
oh my God.
Yeah, I don't think people really, I think because it kind of came in under this grunge cloud, I don't think people really, I think you need to go back and listen to that. Is my point. The way that,
oh my God, man. Yeah.
Great. I thought the guitar player was great in that, the way he used his tunings, and it was just like, I liked the whole thing, I remember I saw him once live, though. It was interesting. I think the bass player got mad halfway through, threw the bass in the air, came down. I think it hit him on the head, and then he just looks up and he walked off stage. And I remember thinking, that's awesome.
Yeah. No, they were the real deal. I mean, they were a band just like The Who or just like Led Zeppelin, or where it was the sum of the parts. If anybody was to not be there, it would totally change the chemistry.
Yeah.
And Chris really always appreciated that about the band. He really appreciated the, even though things like that might happen with Ben. That, and he was like, it's all worth it. Like he told me that, I remember in 2015 once. He was like, it's all, I've come to really appreciate the chemistry and that, and of course they all got older and.
Yeah, it's another thing. It's like I try and tell people, like, it's hard because there's only so much hours in the day, but like there is sometimes when you have something special, it really is. I really wish sometimes you could zoom out. Like there's many projects where I was like, oh, this would be amazing if this person was just more willing to work. And then I remember pushing the ball uphill, then I'd run into them years later and they'd want to like recreate. I'm like, we had that moment and you didn't take advantage of it. And it's too bad because had it been taken advantage of, great things could have come out of it. But it's at some point you just can't force people into the corner. They have to kind of get there themselves. And I think I've definitely acquired that as time goes on. Like even I work on projects now where I'm like, ooh, this is lightning in a bottle. Like, let's keep this rolling. You know what I mean? And it's so nice because, so much great things really could have happened. And then all of a sudden something changes and you can't never be able to recreate it. So it's like trying to capture these moments. Maybe that's kind of why the gear thing is so cool. Like I'm looking at your old Charvel going, yeah, that just reminded me of like, that was that moment. You know what I mean? And maybe that's part of the journey. Maybe that's part of our whole, world that we're creating. Maybe that's why, the gear is such an interesting part. Playing Plexis, and it's the experience. It's like, even now that my dad's getting much older, and we have so much of our relationship was tied into music and gear, and so that affects me differently than it would other things, because it was like when you hear a song that was like imprinted on your youth.
Yeah, these time capsules of 100%. Yeah, and it's good to market and appreciate it, because nothing's forever and all that.
Nothing's forever. Nothing. That's why I'm it's who knows? I'm happy to have this time and talk to stuff. So let's do this. Let's give people a break. I think we've held them hostage long enough. Thank everyone, especially yourself, for being so kind as to invite me, and hopefully you won't fall asleep listening to it. It'll be awesome.
Man, yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. The pleasure was all mine. It was fantastic chatting with you, man. Really appreciate it, and I'm glad we got to do this. Peter Evans there, always popping in at the end with a super chat. I really appreciate you, man. Thank you, Peter. And for the coffee fund, I will buy some more beans and keep it going around here. We'll hang out for a sec, Blues, and I'll say goodbye to you. But folks, I'm going to sign off. We'll see you next week, and everybody take care. Be nice to one another out there.